He slammed the wedding ring onto the table hard enough to crack the wood. Not privately, not quietly. In front of 200 people, soldiers, bosses, wives, and allies, every one of them watching with held breath as Damien Vescari pointed at the trembling woman beside him and said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Don't mistake this for a marriage. You're a condition, nothing more." Serena Valenti didn't cry. She didn't move. She stood in her plain white dress, hands folded at her waist, and looked at him with an expression nobody in that room could read. That was the moment everything changed. For both of them. They just didn't know it yet. If someone treated you that way on the most important day of your life, what would you do? Would you fight back, walk away, or would you stay and make them regret every single word? Hit that like button right now. Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this story has traveled, and stay with me until the very end. Because what happens next inside that marriage will shock you in ways you never expected. The morning Vittorio Marchetti died, the weather in Rome was perfect. That was the thing that bothered Damien most, later. Not the grief. He wasn't sure he felt grief exactly. Not for an old man who had controlled every breath he took since age 17. What bothered him was that the sky was clear and blue and almost offensive in its cheerfulness. While a lawyer named Greco sat across from him in the study and read the terms of a will that felt less like a gift and more like a trap built specifically for him. Damien had been awake for 31 hours. He'd gotten the call about his uncle in the middle of a dinner he hadn't wanted to attend, flown back from Milan on a private jet that felt too quiet, and walked into the Marchetti estate to find it already crawling with men who were watching him with expressions he didn't like, calculating, patient, the kind of look wolves get when they're deciding whether the new animal is worth the effort of a fight. He was 29 years old. He'd spent his entire adult life being told he would inherit the Marchetti empire. He'd spent the last 5 years being groomed for it, learning the territory divisions, the protection arrangements, the legal front companies that moved money through 7 countries without leaving a visible trail. He knew the name of every captain, every allied boss in the commission, every judge they owned in 3 jurisdictions. He was ready. Greco cleared his throat and said, "There is one condition." Damien had been staring at his own reflection in the dark window glass. He turned slowly. "What kind of condition?" It wasn't a question. His voice had learned early to make itself flat when it was most dangerous. Greco slid a single sheet of paper across the mahogany desk. "You must marry Serena Valenti within 30 days. If the marriage does not occur, the estate and controlling shares pass in full to a trust managed by the commission until a suitable alternative leadership arrangement is made." The room was so quiet that Damien could hear the clock on the wall. "Serena Valenti," he repeated. Yes. He knew the name, vaguely. The girl his uncle had brought into the household when she was 11 years old, after some business with her father. He'd never been told the full story, and frankly hadn't cared enough to ask. He'd seen her occasionally over the years at family gatherings, small, quiet, always near the edges of rooms, wearing clothes that seemed designed to make her disappear. Thick glasses, hair pulled back without any particular care, the kind of person you forget immediately after looking away. He stood up. The paper sat on the desk. He didn't touch it. "My uncle lost his mind before the end," he said. Greco's expression didn't change. "The will was drawn up 8 months ago and certified by 3 independent legal witnesses. It is binding. I'm not marrying that girl. Then Lucian Falco receives provisional authority over the organization pending commission review." Damien's jaw tightened. Lucian, his cousin, who had spent the last decade smiling at every dinner table while building connections behind every back, who had never once made a move openly because Lucian didn't make open moves. He waited, accumulated, and struck when the other person had already lost without knowing it. If Lucien got provisional authority, it wouldn't be provisional for long. The commission bosses who owed their positions to Vittorio would shuffle their loyalties inside of a month. The soldiers who'd pledged to Damien would start doing the math. Damien picked up the paper. He read it once, folded it, put it in his jacket pocket. "Tell me about her," he said. Greco looked faintly uncomfortable. "I'm not certain I have detailed information about. Tell me what you know." "She has lived in the household since she was a child. Your uncle paid for her education, privately tutored, some university coursework completed remotely, I believe. She has never worked outside the estate. She has no public profile, no social connections of note. He paused. She is 24 years old. Damien walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. Set the date, he said. 3 weeks from now. Keep it internal. No press. No outside guests. And make sure she understands what this is and what it isn't. He didn't wait for a response. The hallway outside was lined with men who had served his uncle for decades. Men who would now serve him, or serve Lucien, depending on the next 30 days. Several of them met his eyes. A few looked away first. That was something. He didn't go looking for Serena Valenti that night. She could wait. She was in the library when he finally found her, 3 days before the wedding. Not reading, exactly. She was sitting at the long table with 4 separate ledgers open in front of her and a yellow legal pad covered in her own handwriting. She had a pencil behind her ear and a second one in her hand, and she was moving between the ledgers with the focused intensity of someone trying to solve a problem they care about deeply. She didn't hear him come in, or if she heard him, she didn't look up. Serena Valenti, he said. She looked up then. The thick-framed glasses made her eyes seem larger than they were. She was not what anyone would call beautiful. Not the way the women Damien spent his time with were beautiful, polished, and deliberate about it. She was just a girl in an oversized gray sweater with ink on 2 fingers and no particular expression on her face. I know who you are, she said. Her voice was even. No nervousness that he could see. That irritated him slightly. Good, he said. Then you understand the situation. You need to marry me to keep your inheritance. She said it the same way she might say the weather was likely to change. Yes, I understand. He looked at her more carefully. Do you have any objections? Would it matter if I did? He almost smiled, not warmly. No. Then I don't see the point in discussing it. She looked back down at the ledger in front of her. I'll be ready on the day. Was there something else? Nobody spoke to him that way. Not soldiers, not captains, not women who'd known him for years. The flat dismissal of it caught him off guard, just for a second, and he hated that. What are you working on? He asked, and he wasn't sure why he asked it. Your uncle's accounts. She didn't look up again. He kept very thorough records. I've been cross-referencing them. Why? Because someone should. He stood there another moment, waiting for something he couldn't name, and then left without saying goodbye. The wedding was held at the estate on a Thursday afternoon. Damien wore a dark suit and the expression of a man attending an obligation. He arrived in the main hall to find 200 people already assembled, soldiers, captains, allied figures from the commission who'd been invited to witness the transfer of power the marriage represented, and Serena Valenti standing at the front of the room in a white dress that was plain and well-fitted and made her look, if he was honest with himself for a single second, less invisible than he'd expected. He wasn't honest with himself. He looked past her to where Renata Sorelli stood near the far wall. Renata was everything Serena was not. Dark-haired, deliberately beautiful, wearing a red dress she'd chosen with the full knowledge of what it would communicate to everyone in the room. She met his eyes and smiled, slow and certain. Damien let himself smile back. The ceremony was brief. A judge Damien had known for years read the words quickly, without ceremony. When the moment came to exchange rings, Damien put the ring on Serena's finger without looking at her hand, his gaze already drifting toward the assembled guests, doing the political calculation, who was watching, who was not, which captains were standing close together. Serena put the ring on his finger. He didn't notice what her hands felt like. The judge pronounced them married. There was applause, dutiful, uncertain, the sound of people who weren't sure yet what this marriage meant for their own positions. What happened next would be retold in whispers for weeks. At the reception dinner, after the first round of drinks had been poured, Damien rose from the head table and crossed the room, not to speak to his new wife, not to accept the congratulations being offered from multiple directions. He walked to Renata's table. He sat down beside her. He picked up her hand. He said something low that made her laugh, and she tilted toward him in the way she always did, comfortable and proprietary, and the entire room went very still. Serena was still seated at the head table. She didn't turn her head to watch. She picked up her glass of water, took a measured sip, and began a quiet conversation with the elderly woman seated to her left, the widow of a former captain who rarely attended events anymore. Within 2 minutes, they were talking about something that seemed, from the expression on the old woman's face, genuinely interesting. Damien noticed this peripherally. It made him more irritated, which made no sense, so he ignored it. Later, he stood up again and addressed the room. The speech was short, an acknowledgement of his uncle's legacy, a statement of his own authority going forward, the expected formalities. Near the end, he gestured towards Serena. "My wife," he said, the two words carrying the weight of everything he didn't say alongside them. Not a choice, not a partner, not anything that matters to me. Every person in that room understood. Serena looked up at him. Her expression did not collapse. She didn't flush or blink fast or grip the edge of the table. She simply held his gaze for a long moment with those magnified eyes, and then she nodded once, like she was acknowledging something she'd already accounted for, and looked away. Across the room, one of the commission bosses, a heavy-set Neapolitan named Caruso, who had known Vittorio for 40 years, watched Serena with an expression that was harder to read than the others. Not pity, something closer to recognition. He said nothing. He refilled his glass and watched the room. In the days that followed, the household found its shape. Damien kept his own rooms and his own schedule, which meant he was often not at the estate at all. He had business in the city, meetings with captains, the ongoing management of the organization's various operations, the delicate work of establishing himself as the authority his uncle had been without the decades of trust Vittorio had built. It was harder than he'd expected, not because anyone openly challenged him, but because authority at that level is made of 1,000 small moments. The way a man holds a room, the judgment he shows under pressure, the things he does when he thinks no one is watching. Damien was smart enough to know he was being evaluated. He wasn't always sure he was passing. He didn't think about Serena. She was in the library. Or so the household staff reported when he occasionally, casually asked where she was, not out of concern, he told himself, but because he was in his own house, and it was reasonable to know where people were. She was always in the library. One Tuesday evening, returning late from a meeting that had gone poorly, he walked past the library doors and saw the lights still on inside. He checked his watch. It was past midnight. He pushed the door open. She was at the same table, same posture, leaning slightly forward, pencil in hand, 3 open ledgers arranged in a specific order he couldn't immediately understand the logic of. She had a cold cup of tea near her elbow that she'd clearly forgotten. She looked up when the door opened. No surprise. "You're still awake," he said. It came out almost like an accusation. "So are you." She waited. When he didn't leave, she added, "Did you need something?" He looked at the ledgers. The yellow legal pad had many more pages filled now. Her handwriting was small and precise. "What exactly are you doing with those?" She considered him for a moment in a way that felt uncomfortably, like she was deciding how much to tell him. "Your uncle kept 2 sets of financial records," she said. "The official accounts that your legal team manages, and a secondary set he maintained personally. I've been reconciling them." Damien walked closer. The ledgers meant nothing to him immediately. Columns of numbers, coded entries, dates. Why did he keep 2 sets? Most people in his position do. She said it without judgment. But these 2 don't match in ways that could be explained by the usual reasons. He looked at her. "Are you telling me there's money missing?" "I'm telling you there are inconsistencies I can't resolve yet." She held his gaze steadily. "I'll tell you when I can resolve them." He stood there looking at her, this woman in her gray sweater with the forgotten tea and the midnight ledgers, and felt something he couldn't classify. Not attraction, not warmth. Something more like the particular discomfort of realizing you've been wrong about something without knowing yet what you've been wrong about. He left without responding. He didn't sleep well that night, which he blamed on the meeting that had gone poorly and not on anything else. The incident at the estate dinner happened 2 weeks into the marriage. Damien had brought Renata without announcing it. She arrived alongside him, her hand in the crook of his arm, dressed with the deliberate elegance of a woman making a statement. The household staff's faces arranged themselves into carefully neutral expressions. Several of the captains present exchanged glances. Serena was already seated at the dinner table when they entered. She looked at Renata once, a single, direct look that lasted perhaps 2 seconds, and then returned her attention to the captain's wife she'd been speaking to. Through dinner, Damien sat at the head of the table with Renata beside him, where a wife would usually sit. Serena sat 3 chairs down and ate her meal and participated in the conversations around her with the same unhurried composure she brought to everything. It was the composure that made it worse somehow. He'd wanted a reaction. He realized that partway through the second course and found the realization uncomfortable. He'd wanted her to flinch, to excuse herself, to make the small, humiliated retreat that would confirm what he'd already decided about her. That she was weak, that she could be managed, that she was exactly as insignificant as she appeared. She did not flinch. After dinner, Luca Farini, one of Damien's senior captains, a man in his 50s who'd served Vittorio for 20 years, found Damien alone in the hallway and said quietly without preamble, "Your wife asked me 3 weeks ago about the Genoa shipment records. I gave her what she asked for because I assumed you'd cleared it." Damien looked at him. "What shipment records?" Farini's expression shifted. "The 2019 Genoa logistics files. She said she needed them for a cross-reference." He paused. "I assumed. She requested them directly from you." His voice was flat. "Yes." Damien said nothing for a moment. "What else has she requested?" Farini listed 3 additional sets of files over the past month, including 1 set of communication logs from a period Damien knew was sensitive. He'd never told Serena about any of it. She had simply identified what she needed and gone and gotten it. After Farini left, Damien stood alone in the hallway for a long moment. Then he walked to the library. She was there. Of course she was. He closed the door behind him. "You've been pulling files," he said. She looked up. "Yes." "Without telling me." "I didn't think you'd want to be updated until I had something useful to tell you." She set her pencil down. "Do you want me to stop?" "I want to know what you found." She looked at him for a moment with that measuring quality he'd started to recognize. Then she opened the legal pad to a page near the middle and turned it toward him. The numbers were organized into a clear comparison. 2 columns, dates running down the left margin, discrepancies marked in red. The total at the bottom of the red column was not a small number. Damien looked at it. He picked up the legal pad and looked more carefully. "Where's this going?" he said. His voice was quiet in a way that was different from his usual flatness, quieter, colder. "Offshore. Through 3 intermediate accounts before it disappears." She reached across and pointed at a specific entry. "This routing code. I've seen it before, and it's not one of your uncle's established channels. Someone created it in the last 2 years." He stared at the page. "I was very good at reading numbers and their implications." It took him about 40 seconds to understand what he was looking at. "Lucien," he said, "I can't prove it's him specifically. Not yet. But the timing aligns with his increased access to the organization's accounts after your uncle's health declined." She paused. "And the amounts have been escalating. Whatever he's building, it's expensive." Damien set the legal pad down very carefully. He looked at his wife, plain, quiet, invisible Serena Valenti, with her thick glasses and her gray sweater and her cold tea, and understood for the first time something his uncle had understood years earlier. She was not decoration. She was not a condition. She was possibly the most dangerous person in this house. He sat down across from her. "Show me everything," he said. He sat down across from her. "Show me everything," he said. She didn't move immediately. She looked at him the way she looked at the ledgers, carefully, without excitement, like she was deciding whether the data in front of her was reliable enough to work with. Then she reached across the table and pulled a second legal pad from beneath a stack of folders and set it beside the first one. "This is the full reconciliation," she said. 14 months of discrepancies. I organized them by routing code and then by date." He picked it up. He read the way he did everything, fast, completely, without performance. Halfway down the first page, his jaw tightened. By the second page, he'd stopped breathing normally. He set it down with a control that was visible in his hands. In the deliberate way, he placed it flat on the table instead of letting it drop. "How long have you known?" he said. "I suspected 3 weeks after I started reviewing the accounts. I've been building the confirmation since then." 3 weeks. His voice was level. "You've known for 3 weeks that someone is bleeding this organization and you didn't—" "I didn't know who." She met his eyes without flinching. "I still don't know for certain. I have a strong pattern, and I have a routing code I can't trace to any of your uncle's established structures. Suspicion isn't the same as evidence." In this organization, suspicion is sometimes enough. Not for something this size. She folded her hands on the table. If you move on Lucien with suspicion and you're wrong, you start a war with the Commission's second most influential bloc, and you've been in your position for less than a month. If you move on him with evidence, you end it. He stared at her. She said it the way a general explains basic strategy to someone who should already know it. Not condescending, just precise. When will you have evidence? He said. I need access to one more set of records. The operational accounts from the Calabria territory for the last 18 months. Your uncle's personal copies, not the ones in the main system. Why the personal copies? Because I think the main system copies have been altered. She paused. Whoever did this is careful, but your uncle was more careful, and he kept everything twice. Damien pushed back from the table and stood up. He moved to the window and stood with his back to her, looking at nothing. She let him stand there. She didn't fill the silence. He knew, Damien said finally. She didn't answer right away. I think he suspected. I think that's part of why he structured the will the way he did. He turned around. His face had an expression she hadn't seen before. Not anger, not calculation, something older than both. He was trying to buy me time, he said. The marriage condition, the 30 days. It was designed to slow things down, and to give you a reason to look at the books before you started making decisions. She looked at him steadily. He knew you wouldn't look at them yourself. The silence that followed was a different kind, not comfortable. The kind that settles when someone has said a true thing and the other person has to decide whether to punish them for it or accept it. Damien looked at the legal pad. Then he looked at her. Where are the Calabria records? He said. Your uncle's private office, second drawer of the oak filing cabinet, behind the insurance documentation. She said it without hesitation. He looked at her a moment longer. Then he left. She picked up her pencil and went back to work. He found the Calabria records exactly where she said they would be. He brought them to the library at 11 the next morning and put them on the table in front of her without ceremony. She opened the first folder immediately and began comparing pages against what she already had. He poured himself coffee from the service the staff had left on the sideboard and sat down across from her and watched her work. She worked the way she did everything, quietly, with a focus that seemed to exclude the rest of the room. She moved between documents without rushing. She made marks on her legal pad. Once she stopped, went back 3 pages, rechecked something, and made a small sound that was not quite a word. What? He said. The alteration pattern. She turned one of the Calabria pages toward him and pointed at a column of figures. These have been changed, but the original values are visible under the correction fluid if you hold it at the right angle. He leaned across and looked. She was right. Faint impressions of the original numbers ghosted beneath the cover-up. The corrected figures are lower, she said. Whoever adjusted these reduced the reported incoming by approximately 18% across the period. The difference moved somewhere, based on the routing pattern in the other ledgers. It's the same destination, he said. Yes. He sat back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Lucien has had access to the Calabria accounts for 4 years, he said. He asked my uncle personally, said the territory captain was struggling and needed closer oversight from the family. He paused. My uncle agreed. Your uncle agreed and then started keeping personal copies of everything. She looked at him. I don't think that was a coincidence. Damien stood up again. He couldn't stay still with it. He moved to the window, to the bookcase, back toward the table. Serena watched him without comment. If he's been moving money, Damien said, it's going somewhere. You don't skim this kind of volume just to sit on it. No. She had already turned to a new page on the legal pad. On it, she had written a single line that she turned toward him now. Infrastructure, personnel, acquisition. He's building something, Damien said. He's been building it for at least 2 years, maybe longer. She put her pencil down and looked at him directly. The commission meeting is in 6 weeks. The full gathering, all the regional heads, the senior bosses, the allied families. Your uncle attended every year. You're expected to attend as the new head of the Marchetti family. He understood what she was pointing at before she said it. If Lucien moves before then, he said, he establishes himself before you've had a chance to consolidate. He presents the other bosses with a fait accompli. Damien Vescari, new and untested, versus Lucian Falco, who's been cultivating those relationships for a decade. She let that land. The commission doesn't like disorder. They'll accept whoever is already holding the table. Damien's jaw worked. He was doing the math, and he didn't like where it came out. "What do you need to finish this?" he said. "2 more weeks, and I need you not to do anything that signals to Lucian that we're looking at the books." The word we sat in the air between them. He noticed it. He thought she probably noticed it too. "Fine," he said. He picked up his coffee. 2 weeks. He left. She turned back to the ledgers. The following days had a different texture. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't anything close to that. But the household felt the shift in small ways. Damien came to the library in the evenings more often than not, sometimes asking specific questions about what she was finding, sometimes just sitting with his own work at the far end of the table. They talked when they needed to talk. They didn't talk when they didn't. It was the functional silence of 2 people focused on the same problem, and it was, Damien admitted to no one, more comfortable than most of the conversations he had with people who were supposed to be comfortable. Renata noticed. She said nothing at first. She was too composed for first impulses. But the 3rd evening, Damien declined to come into the city, citing meetings, which was true, and also citing paperwork at the estate, which was also true, even if the paperwork wasn't his. She called him from a restaurant table where she'd been waiting 40 minutes. "You're staying in again," she said. "I have things I need to handle." "You've had things to handle every evening this week." "I'm trying to consolidate an inheritance that's being eaten from the inside, Renata. It's not a simple operation." A pause. "I heard you've been spending time in the library." He felt the particular prickling irritation of someone stating a true thing with a false implication loaded into it. "I use the library, yes." "With her." "Serena has been helping me review the accounts." He kept his voice even. "She's thorough. She has access to records I need." Another pause, longer. "Damien." "Don't," he said. "She is not—" "Renata." His voice shifted into something colder. "I will call you tomorrow." He ended the call and sat with the phone in his hand for a moment, looking at nothing. Then he put it in his pocket and went back to the estate. He told himself it was because he had work to do. The next thing that broke was Luca Farini. Damien had sent him to run a quiet verification on the Calabria territory. Nothing aggressive, just a visit to the local captain on a pretense of routine oversight, with instructions to observe and report back. Farini was one of the men Damien trusted at close range. He'd known him since he was a teenager, following his uncle around at meetings. Farini came back pale. He found Damien in the study and closed the door and stood with his hands clasped in front of him, which was not his usual posture. "Tell me," Damien said. "The Calabria operation has 3 times the personnel it should have." Farini's voice was careful. "I did a count. 41 men stationed there under a regional captain who should be managing 12 to 15 maximum. The excess aren't local. I didn't recognize half of them. Younger, better equipped." Damien was still. "Mercenaries. Or private contractors. Either way, they're not ours." Damien picked up a pen from the desk and turned it in his fingers. A habit. It helped him not show his hands in his face. "Did the captain there give you anything?" He was polite. He was also terrified. Farini's jaw set. He knows which way the wind is blowing. He's already made his choice. Damien set the pen down. He thought about the timeline Serena had laid out. 6 weeks to the commission meeting, Lucian building for 2 years, the money moving into infrastructure and personnel. He thought about 41 men in Calabria and whatever else Lucian had positioned in territories he hadn't visited yet. "How many territories does Lucian have direct oversight of?" he said. Farini looked at the floor briefly. 6, including the 2 your uncle gave him as his authority expanded. 6 territories. 6 potential staging grounds. Damien had 7 loyal captains he was certain of. The math was not comfortable. He stood up. "Say nothing to anyone. I mean to anyone. Not your lieutenant, not men you've known for 15 years. You come to me directly." "Yes." Farini hesitated. "He knows you're looking, Damien. I can't say how he knows, but the way the Calabria captain was acting, he wasn't surprised I'd come. He was expecting some kind of check." After Farini left, Damien sat in the study alone for 20 minutes. Then he went to the library. Serena was there. It was nearly 9 in the evening. The light outside had gone completely. He closed the door and said, without sitting down, "He knows." She looked up. She read his face. He saw her doing it, quick and precise, and she set down her pencil. Farini's visit. The Calabria captain was expecting it. Lucien has someone feeding him information. He moved to the table and planted both hands on it and looked at her. "Who else has seen what you've been working on?" "No one has seen this room. I work after midnight usually." She was calm, which he needed her to be. "The records I've requested." Farini knew about some of them. Anyone watching Farini's interactions with the household would know I've been pulling files. Farini didn't tell him. "No, but Lucien has his own eyes in this house." She said it without drama. "Your uncle knew it too. That's why the personal copies were kept separate." Damien straightened. "How long until you have enough to bring to the commission?" "A week, maybe less if you can confirm the routing endpoint. I need a name on the destination account." She looked at him. "If we bring this to the commission and it's incomplete, Lucien will have time to move the money and the paperwork. We get one opportunity." 1 week. He said it mostly to himself. He moved away from the table and turned and moved back, the controlled agitation of a man who wants to act and knows he can't yet. He could move in that time frame. He could, but he won't move before the commission meeting if he's smart, and Lucien is smart. She folded her hands. The commission is the legitimizing moment. He doesn't just want the organization, he wants it recognized. Moving early means fighting a prolonged internal war. He needs the bosses to ratify him. And if we don't have enough to stop that ratification, then we need to have enough to make the bosses refuse it. She looked at him directly. That's not the same thing as having enough for a conviction. We need enough to make 12 men who care about stability and money decide that Lucien is a liability. He stood there looking at her. In the harsh overhead light of the library, she was exactly the same as she'd always been. Plain, still, watching him with those magnified eyes. And at the same time, she was something entirely different from the woman he'd dismissed at the wedding dinner. "The commission meeting," he said. "Will they receive you?" A very slight pause. "Not as Damien Vescari's quiet wife, no. But Vittorio Marchetti introduced me to 4 of the sitting bosses by name. One of them, Caruso, came to me personally at the estate 2 years ago with a financial question he didn't want to bring to the family. I resolved it for him." She said it simply, without vanity. "If I walk into that room with documented evidence and I present it as Vittorio's work, the culmination of a 2-year investigation he began before his health failed, they'll listen." Damien stared at her. "You're telling me my uncle used you as an analyst." "Your uncle used me as many things." She met his gaze without apology. He was a practical man. The piece of it that should have made him angry, that his uncle had built this into the situation, had arranged Serena's role without ever telling him, had trusted this quiet woman with more than he'd trusted his own heir. That piece slid into a different configuration. Not anger. Something that was almost grief. And underneath it, something that was almost unwillingly respect. "If we go to the commission," he said slowly, "and we present this as Vittorio's investigation, the bosses will see it as his final act of housekeeping, cleaning up a traitor before his death. Yes. And that makes them more likely to back the existing structure. Me." He paused. "Us." She didn't react to the word. "The presentation matters as much as the evidence, maybe more." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He put his elbows on the table. He looked at the spread of papers and ledgers between them. "What do you need me to do?" he said. It was the first time he'd asked her that. The shape of the question was different from the directives he usually gave. She heard the difference. He saw that she heard it. "I need you to set up a meeting with Caruso," she said, "privately, before the commission gathering. I need to know what he knows, and I need to know whether he's already chosen a side. Caruso will meet with me. Tell him you want his counsel on a matter of organizational continuity. Don't mention Lucien." She reached across and pulled the primary legal pad to the center of the table. "And I need 3 more days with these records. There's one more discrepancy I can't place." "What kind of discrepancy?" "A payment. Substantial. Single transfer, 14 months ago, through a different routing structure than everything else. It doesn't fit Lucien's pattern." She pointed at a line on the pad. This one concerns me more than the others, actually. He leaned over to read it. The amount was significant. The date was 3 months before Vittorio's health had begun its final decline. Something moved in the back of his mind that he didn't fully form yet. He let it sit. Sit. Find it, he said. I intend to. He stayed at the table for another hour that night, reading through the documents she'd already analyzed, asking occasional questions she answered precisely. Outside, the estate was quiet. The staff had gone to bed. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck 11, then midnight. At some point, she made fresh tea and put a cup near his elbow without comment. He drank it without acknowledging it. When he left, just past 1 in the morning, he said goodnight for the first time since the wedding. She said it back without looking up. The meeting with Caruso happened 4 days later at a restaurant in Trastevere that Caruso had used for private conversations for 30 years. Caruso was a large man, not tall, but wide, with the kind of stillness that comes not from calm, but from decades of learning to appear calm. He'd been one of Vittorio's oldest allies, and he'd also, Damien knew, been one of his oldest rivals. The kind of relationship that hardens into genuine respect only because neither man ever managed to fully outmaneuver the other. He looked at Damien across the table with an expression that didn't offer anything yet. "Your wife," he said after the first coffee had been poured. "How is she?" It was not small talk. Damien recognized it for what it was. "She's well," he said. "Vittorio thought a great deal of her." Caruso picked up his cup. "You know that." "I'm beginning to understand it." A pause. Caruso set the cup down. "What is it you need, Damien?" Damien looked at him steadily. "I need to know whether you've seen anything unusual in the last 18 months. Financial disruptions. Territory behaviors that seem like staging." Caruso was quiet for a long moment. A couple at another table laughed at something. Outside, a motorcycle passed on the street. "Lucien Falco," Caruso said, not a question. "Tell me what you know." "I know he's been meeting with the Neapolitan bloc privately, 4 times in the last year. I only know about 3 of them for certain." Caruso's voice was measured. "I know his Calabria operation has expanded in ways that are not consistent with the territory's reported income. And I know that 2 commission members have received very substantial gifts recently, the kind of gifts that create obligations." Damien felt the floor of it drop another level. "Which 2? Caruso told him. One of the names was a surprise, the other wasn't. "If he has those 2, Damien said, he needs 4 votes to block any motion against him. With those 2 secured, he needs 2 more. The Neapolitan bloc is 3 votes. Caruso looked at him with the patience of a man who has watched many younger men do the arithmetic in real time. "The commission meeting is in 19 days, Damien. If he has 6 committed votes before the gathering, he tables a motion of no confidence in your leadership. It requires only a simple majority to pass." Damien was very still. "He's been building this since before my uncle died," he said. "He's been building this for at least 3 years. Caruso said it without pleasure. Vittorio knew. He watched and kept records and chose not to move because he was dying, and a premature move would have triggered exactly what he was trying to prevent. He looked at Damien steadily. "He left you a wife instead." The restaurant noise continued around them. Damien sat with it. "We have evidence," he said. "Financial documentation of the diversion, routes, amounts, dates, 2 years of a pattern." Something shifted in Caruso's expression. Not surprise. More like the particular look of a man who has been waiting for a specific thing to happen and is now watching it happen. "From the accounts. From my uncle's personal records. Vittorio's records." A brief pause. "Who compiled it?" Damien looked at him. "Serena." Caruso picked up his coffee cup again and sat with it without drinking, looking at something across the room that wasn't there. "He prepared her for this," he said quietly, to himself as much as to Damien. "The old bastard actually prepared her for this." "You knew," Damien said. "I knew Vittorio believed she was the most capable person he'd ever trained." Caruso set the cup down. "I didn't know how he intended to deploy that." He looked at Damien. "Can she present the evidence at the commission gathering?" "Yes." "Will she?" Damien thought about Serena in the library at midnight. Serena's voice, steady and exact, laying out routing codes and alteration patterns, and the logic of a trap she'd been quietly constructing for months. "Yes," he said. Caruso leaned forward slightly. Then you need to move before the meeting, not against Lucian directly. If he's harmed before the gathering, it creates a martyr and brings the Neapolitan bloc in against you regardless of what you present. But you need to secure the undecided votes. There are 4 commission members who haven't committed. I can help you reach 2 of them. He paused. The other 2 are yours to find. Damien nodded. And the meeting itself. Request a formal address slot. As the new head of the Marchetti family, you have standing to address the commission on matters of organizational integrity. Use that slot. Caruso met his eyes. But understand, once you walk into that room and make this accusation, there is no version of what follows that does not end in blood, either his or yours. The words settled like stone. Damien met the old man's gaze and said, I know. He drove back to the estate with the city moving past the window in long smears of light. He was thinking about what Caruso had said and also about what Caruso hadn't said, about the 2 commission members Lucian had bought and what that meant for the vote count and whether 4 undecided bosses could be moved in 19 days. He was thinking about the structure of the presentation Serena would need to give and whether the evidence as she'd assembled it was strong enough to make 12 men override an alliance Lucian had built over years. He was not thinking about Renata. She was at the estate when he arrived. She was in the main sitting room with a glass of wine and the posture of someone who has been waiting long enough that the waiting has become a position. She looked up when he came in and something moved across her face. Relief, quickly compressed into something more controlled. You didn't return my call, she said. He stopped in the doorway. I was in a meeting. 3 calls, Damien. I was in a meeting and then I was driving. He moved into the room. He was tired and the conversation with Caruso was still sitting in his chest with all its weight, and he did not have the available space for whatever this was. What is it you need? She set down the wine glass. I need to understand what's happening. I'm managing an organizational crisis, you know that. I know you're spending every evening in the library with your wife, she said. The word came out with a precision that made it clear she'd been carrying it. I know you've declined to see me 4 times this week. I know that when I call you, something has shifted in how you speak to me. He looked at her. She was beautiful. She had always been beautiful, and she knew it, and she used it, and those things had never bothered him before because he'd always known exactly what he wanted from her and what she wanted from him, and the transaction had been clean. Now the transaction felt slightly different in a way he hadn't decided about yet. Serena is helping me with the accounts, he said. It's a business necessity. There's nothing else to explain. Renata looked at him for a long moment. She's not what she looks like, she said quietly. Something sharpened in him. What does that mean? It means I've heard things. From people in this house. She's been pulling files from the archive. She's been requesting documents from captains. People talk. She looked at him steadily. She's not just sitting in that library reading, Damien. She's doing something. She's helping me, he said, which is more than most people in this house have been doing. The silence after that was different. Renata's jaw tightened slightly. Be careful, she said. Be careful about trusting someone you don't know. He looked at her. I know her better than I did a month ago. It was not a comforting thing to say, and he knew it as soon as he'd said it, but he didn't take it back. She picked up her glass and finished the wine in it with composure. She stood up. She was very controlled and very careful, and underneath both of those things she was, he thought, genuinely frightened, though whether she was frightened of losing him or frightened of something else, he couldn't quite determine. I'll let you get back to your work, she said, and left. He stood in the empty room for a moment, then he went upstairs. He did not go to the library. The call came at 4 in the morning. His phone lit up the bedside table with Farini's name, and he answered before the second ring. There's a problem, Farini said. His voice had the tight quality of a man who'd been awake too long and found something he hadn't wanted to find. One of our men in the city, Barto, the one who monitors the communications traffic for the eastern routes, he went missing 6 hours ago. His apartment was cleaned out, not searched, cleaned, like he left on his own. Damien was already sitting up. He flipped. He had access to the routing codes for our communication channels. If he gave those to... Lucian knows what we've been doing. Damien said it flat. No question. A pause. Damien, there's something else. Farini's voice dropped. I got a tip from a contact in the Neapolitan bloc 40 minutes ago. The man owed me a favor. He said Lucian has called a private meeting of his aligned captains for tomorrow night. Not in territory. In the city. An unmarked location. The air in the room felt suddenly very particular. The kind of particular that means something is about to happen. He's not waiting for the commission meeting, Damien said. No. Farini's voice was very quiet. He's not. Damien stood up in the dark room, the floor cold under his feet, the city outside the window still and black and full of things moving in it that he couldn't see. Get the cars ready, he said, and wake Serena. Damien was already moving before Farini finished the sentence. He dressed in the dark, jacket, shoes, the shoulder holster he hadn't worn inside the estate before now, and he was in the hallway in under 2 minutes, his mind running the calculations the way it did under pressure, stripping away everything that wasn't load-bearing. Lucien had their communication codes. Lucien had called a private meeting. Lucien was not waiting. He knocked once on Serena's door and opened it without waiting for an answer. She was already awake. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, shoes on, her legal pad in her lap. She looked at him when he came in, and her face had the particular quality he'd come to recognize. Not calm exactly, but gathered, like someone who had already run the bad scenarios and was now simply waiting to find out which one had arrived. He's moving early, she said. Not a question. Tonight. Farini got a tip from the Neapolitan block. He's called his aligned captains together. Damien moved to the center of the room. Our communication codes are compromised. Barto flipped. She absorbed this in one breath. He knows what we have. He knows we've been looking. He may not know the full scope of what you've assembled. He looked at her. Does it matter? It matters if he moves against the physical records. She was already on her feet, moving to the desk by the window. She opened the bottom drawer and removed a slim metal case he'd never seen before. The originals of the most critical documents. I made copies of the core ledger pages 3 weeks ago and moved them here. She held up the case. This is the evidentiary foundation. The rest can be reconstructed if we lose the library. He stared at the case. You anticipated this. I anticipated that someone in this house talks. She met his eyes briefly. I've been assuming the library wasn't secure since week 2. He didn't say anything for a second. Then he said, we need to move. If Lucien's meeting tonight produces an action order, we have hours at best. Where are we going? City. Caruso has a secondary property in Prati. He offered it last week, said if things deteriorated faster than expected, I should use it. It's clean. It's off the known grid. He was already moving toward the door. Bring what matters. Nothing else. She was ready in 40 seconds. He noticed this the way he noticed practical things that changed his calculations. Without sentiment, with the precise recognition of something that was useful. They went down the back stairs together. Farini had 2 cars waiting in the rear courtyard, engines running, 4 men split between them. He met Damien at the bottom of the steps with the tight expression of a man who'd been awake for 30 hours managing something that kept getting larger. The city house is being watched, he said immediately. My man drove past 20 minutes ago. 2 cars parked on opposite ends of the block. They're not ours. Damien absorbed this without stopping moving. The front gate. Clear so far, but Damien, if Barto gave them the communication structure, they know our protocols. They'll know when we go radio silent that something has changed. Then we move before they expect movement. He looked at the 2 cars. Which driver do you trust most? Ricci. Farini gestured toward the lead car. He's been with me 12 years. He drives us. The second car runs a separate route, radioactive, makes enough noise to look like the principal movement. He turned to Farini. I need you here. If Lucien makes a move on the estate tonight, I'll hold it. Farini said it flat and certain. Go. Damien looked at him. For a moment, a fraction of a second, something moved in his face that wasn't authority or calculation. Then it closed again. Don't take unnecessary ground, he said. Stall if you have to. I'll be in contact through the Caruso channel. He opened the rear door of the lead car. Serena got in. He got in behind her and pulled the door shut, and Ricci had them moving before the latch had fully caught. The city at 4 in the morning was not empty, but it was thinned. Delivery trucks, a few taxis, the particular quality of urban darkness that exists between the end of nightlife and the beginning of the working day. Ricci drove without headlights for the first 3 blocks until they cleared the estate's immediate neighborhood, which Damien had told him to do and which he did without comment. Serena sat with the metal case on her lap. She was looking out the window at the passing streets, and in the weak light her face was difficult to read. "How complete is it?" Damien said. He kept his voice low, though Ricci had the privacy partition up. "The routing evidence is complete. The account destination is identified." She looked at him. "What I don't have yet is the name attached to the destination account. It's behind a legal shell in Luxembourg. 3 layers. I could get through it with another day, maybe 2. We may not have 2 days." "No." She looked at the case in her hands. "Without the name, we have the evidence of where the money went. We can describe the shell structurally. It won't be airtight. Is it enough to make the bosses doubt him?" She thought about this with the honest precision she brought to everything. "It's enough to create serious questions. Whether that's enough to stop a ratification vote in 19 days? I don't know." She paused. "What we need is someone who knows Lucian's structure from the inside. Someone who can confirm the shell identity without needing the legal documentation." Damien was quiet for a moment. "I was thinking about the one name that had been sitting in the back of his mind since the conversation with Caruso, the name on the 2 commission members who'd received Lucian's gifts, the second name, the one that hadn't surprised him. The reason it hadn't surprised him was something he hadn't examined fully yet, and he didn't examine it now. He filed it. "There's someone," he said. "One of the 6 captains in Lucian's territory oversight. He's been with the organization longer than Lucian has. If the money movement involved his territory, he knows." "Will he talk?" "He might. If he understands that Lucian is going to lose." She looked at him. "You have to be certain before you approach him. If you're wrong about his willingness, I know." He looked out the window. The city was a little lighter now, the horizon beginning to separate from the sky in the east. One problem at a time. Caruso's Prati property was on the 4th floor of a residential building on a street of similar residential buildings, the kind of place that was notable for being completely unremarkable. The door was opened by a man in his 60s who Damien recognized as one of Caruso's oldest personal staff, who said nothing, let them in, showed them the rooms available, left food on the table, and withdrew. The apartment had 3 rooms and a north-facing window with a view of rooftops. It was clean and it smelled of old wood and coffee grounds, and it was, more than anywhere Damien had been in the last month, quiet. Serena went directly to the table and opened the metal case and began organizing the documents inside it with the systematic focus she brought to all her work. Damien poured coffee from the service on the counter and stood with it, watching her, and tried to think. The shape of what he was looking at. Lucien had moved faster than expected because he'd had an informant. The communication codes were blown. The estate might be under surveillance or already partially compromised. They had evidence that was strong but not complete. They had 19 days to the commission meeting, and Lucien had tonight, possibly, to decide whether to try something more direct. His phone rang. Farini's emergency channel, a number Damien had given him only 3 weeks ago, clean of the compromised codes. He answered. "He moved on the library," Farini said. His voice was completely controlled, which meant things were bad. 40 minutes after you left, 4 men came in over the south wall. My people stopped them before they reached the house. 2 of his men are down. 2 ran." Damien closed his eyes briefly. "Any one of ours." Marcello took a knife across the forearm. "He'll keep the arm." A pause. "Damien." They knew exactly where to go. They went straight for the library wing. They had the floor plan. Someone in the house, not just Barto, someone with access to the estate's internal layout. That narrowed the possibilities in ways that were deeply unpleasant. "Lock the estate down," Damien said. "Nobody in or out without your personal clearance. I mean nobody, staff, family, anyone." "Understood." Farini hesitated. "There's something else. After we secured the perimeter, I went through the library myself. Your uncle's Calabria files, the originals you pulled from his office." Damien's grip on the phone tightened. "What about them?" "They're gone." A brief pause. "Someone took them before the raid, before your people left tonight. They were gone when I got to the room." The coffee in Damien's hand was suddenly something he couldn't feel. He set it on the counter. "The copies," he said. He looked at Serena, who had looked up from the table and was watching him with absolute stillness. "Are the copies safe?" Serena held up the metal case. He breathed once. "Farini, the originals are gone. What we have in hand is what we work with. Hold the estate." He ended the call. He stood in the kitchen of an apartment that wasn't his and looked at a woman who was watching him with the focused quiet she always had and said, "They took the originals from the library before the raid. Someone pulled them before we left." She didn't move. "From inside the estate?" "Yes." A silence. She looked down at the case. She opened it and checked the documents inside with methodical care, page by page, not rushing, checking each one against an internal inventory he wasn't privy to. After 3 minutes, she closed it and looked at him. "Everything critical is here," she said. "The originals were important for authentication, but what I pulled for this case are the highest value pages, the ones with the routing codes and the correction fluid alterations. Those are not replaceable from the main system. Can the evidence stand without the originals?" "Weakened, not destroyed." She looked at him steadily. "We need that shell account name more than we needed the originals. The originals proved the money moved. The name proves where it went and who controls it." He moved to the table and sat down across from her. He was exhausted in a way that was physical and also something else. The particular exhaustion of a man who has been running his own organization for less than 2 months and has discovered in that time that the ground beneath it was never as solid as he was told. "There's someone else," he said. He put his hands flat on the table. "In the house. Someone who knew where the Calabria files were and had access to the library and knew we were leaving tonight." She met his gaze. She didn't say anything. "The layout of the estate," he said. "The exact wing. The Calabria file location." He stopped. "Who knew all three?" "Several people, potentially." She paused. "But the timing, knowing we were leaving tonight specifically, that's a shorter list." He looked at her. "Farini knew," she said carefully, "but you trust him." "With my life. And he's the one who warned me." "Yes." She was doing the same calculation he was doing, arriving at the same narrowing point. "Ricci knew. He was there when the cars were prepared, but Ricci doesn't know the floor plan." Damien said nothing. "I was looking at the table, at a fixed point on the wood surface, with the expression of a man who is allowing himself to look at something he's been keeping in his peripheral vision for the last hour. "Renata was in the house tonight," he said. Serena was very still. "She came 2 evenings ago and didn't leave." He said it without emotion, just the facts of it, assembled in a line. "She has been in that house for 3 years whenever she chose to be. She knows every room. She's been in my uncle's study. I've seen her there." He lifted his eyes from the table. "After I told her I was in an organizational crisis, after she specifically asked about you, about the library." Serena held his gaze. She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't soften it. "Is that what you think happened?" she said. "What I think," he said, and his voice was very quiet, "is that I have been sharing a house and a life with someone for 3 years, and I never asked what she wanted out of it. Not really." He sat back. He looked at the ceiling. "She wasn't just watching me. She was positioned there." "You don't know that yet." "No." He looked at her again. "But I know she was afraid of you specifically, not of the situation, of you. She told me to be careful about trusting someone I didn't know." He stopped. "She knew enough to be afraid." Serena looked at the metal case on the table between them. "If she's been feeding information to Lucien, then she's been doing it for longer than this, since before my uncle died." He stopped again. Something in his face moved and then went still. "Since before." The weight of it landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Damien stood up. He walked to the window and stood with his back to her, looking at the rooftops going pale in the early morning light, and she let him stand there the same way she always did, without filling the silence, without performing sympathy, without doing anything other than being present and allowing him the space to hold what he was holding. He stood there for a long time. When he turned around, his face had changed, not softened, resolved, the way a muscle resolves after a prolonged contraction, like something had been decided not in his mind but in his body. "We can't go back to the estate," he said. "No." "And we can't move on Lucien directly without the account name." "No." "Then we need another angle." He moved back to the table. He sat down. "The captain I mentioned, the The one who's been in Lucien's oversight longer than Lucien has. His name is Enzo Dati. He runs the Umbrian territory. He's 62 years old, and he served my uncle directly for 9 years before Lucien was given the oversight authority. He looked at her. If Lucien's financial structure ran through Umbria, and based on what you found, I believe it did, Dati has seen things. Whether he documented them is another question. Can you reach him without going through the compromised channels? I can reach him through Caruso. Caruso and Dati have a relationship that predates the current commission structure. He pulled out his phone. But Serena, if Dati has chosen Lucien's side, reaching out through Caruso might flag our location. She thought about this. The light coming through the north window was getting stronger, beginning to pick up the color of early day, and it caught the edge of her glasses and the line of her jaw and the ink stain on her right forefinger from the night's work. Caruso's loyalty is genuine, she said finally. He's not aligned with Lucien. If he were, he would have given you nothing useful at the restaurant meeting. He gave you 2 of the 4 undecided commission votes. She paused. I think the risk of using him to reach Dati is lower than the risk of sitting still. He nodded once. He was already composing the message in his head. What to say, how to say it through a channel that might be partially observed, how to convey urgency without conveying location. He sent it. Then he put the phone on the table and looked at her and said, Get some sleep. 2 hours at least. You're not useful to me exhausted. She looked at him for a moment. Neither are you. I'm not going to sleep. I know. She looked at the case. Then let me keep working. He moved aside. She pulled the documents back out and began again. He sat at the far end of the table with his phone and his coffee and the thin early light and watched the city come alive through the window and thought about Renata. He thought about 3 years of dinners and late nights and the specific way she laughed when she wanted something. The warmth that was calibrated, that he'd always known was calibrated and hadn't minded because he'd thought the calibration was aimed at him and not at something beyond him. He thought about the night she'd said, "Be careful about trusting someone you don't know," with the fear in her eyes that he'd misread as jealousy. He sat with it. He didn't allow himself to collapse it into something clean. It was what it was. Well, Caruso's response came 90 minutes later. Dati will meet. Noon. The address I'm sending is a restaurant he owns in Perugia. He says, come alone. My word to him is that it's a matter of the family's survival, which is what you told me and what I believe to be true. Don't be late. Damien showed the message to Serena. She read it. Perugia is 2 hours. You'd need to leave by 9:30. You stay here. The case stays here. She looked at him. Something moved in her face. Not fear, but its cousin. The recognition of a risk she couldn't calculate for him. If Dati is already committed to Lucien, she began, then I find out in Perugia and not here. He met her eyes. Caruso vouched for the meeting. That's what I have. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. He slept for 90 minutes on the apartment's narrow sofa, more from discipline than from any feeling of tiredness leaving him, and was in Ricci's car by 9:15 heading north out of Rome into the green rolling landscape of Umbria. The restaurant in Perugia was closed to the public at noon on a Tuesday, but the front door was unlocked, and inside at a corner table with a glass of mineral water and a bread roll he'd broken into pieces and hadn't eaten sat Enzo Dati. He was a compact, weathered man with gray at his temples and large hands that had done physical work at some point in his life before the organizational work took over. He watched Damien come in across the empty restaurant with the patient expression of a man who has had many difficult conversations and knows how they begin. Damien sat down across from him. There was no greeting. Caruso told me what this is, Dati said. His voice was low and a little rough. He didn't tell me what you want from me specifically. I want the name on the Luxembourg Shell account. Damien said it straight. No warm-up. Dati looked at him for a long time. He picked up a piece of the broken bread and turned it in his fingers and put it down again. Outside on the street a car passed, then nothing. What you're asking, Dati said carefully, is for me to confirm something that would require me to have direct knowledge of Lucien Falco's financial structure. Yes. Which would mean I've known about it. Yes. Another long look. And you're asking me this in a restaurant in Perugia where no one knows you are, which means you understand that your communication structure has been compromised and that you're out of safe options. He said it without satisfaction. That's what I'm reading. Read it however you want, Damien said. I need the name. Dottie looked at the broken bread on his plate. He was silent long enough that Damien could hear the ticking of a clock somewhere in the restaurant kitchen. I've known about the account for 14 months, Dottie said finally. His voice was very level, the voice of a man reciting something he's been holding for a long time. Lucian brought me into the structure early. He needed the Umbrian routing to complete one transfer leg. He told me it was a family investment, authorized by your uncle. He showed me paperwork. He paused. The paperwork was good. I believed it. When did you stop believing it? When your uncle got sick and Lucian's requests accelerated. Dottie picked up his water glass. He didn't drink from it. And when I started hearing things from my Calabrian contacts about the personnel expansion, that kind of buildup isn't investment, it's preparation. Damien was watching him carefully. What did you do? Nothing. Dottie set the glass down. I'm 62 years old and I have 4 grandchildren, and I made a calculation. He looked at Damien with the directness of a man who's past the age of pretending. I was wrong to make that calculation. I know that, but I made it. Give me the name, Damien said. If I give you the name, Dottie said, and you bring it to the commission, my involvement in the routing becomes visible. I helped him move money. Unintentionally, but the records show what they show. I'm not interested in you. Damien held his gaze. I'm interested in stopping a man who has an army in Calabria and bought 2 commission votes and is planning to declare me dead before the month is out. Dottie looked at him for another long moment. Meridian Conseil, he said. That's the shell name. It's registered in Luxembourg under a numbered company. The beneficial owner, Chico, the actual human name attached to the beneficial ownership declaration, is listed as a legal proxy. He reached into his jacket and removed a folded piece of paper. He placed it on the table. I wrote it down 3 months ago because I thought one day someone would sit across from me and ask. Damien picked it up. He unfolded it in the paper. He read it twice. The restaurant was very quiet. The clock in the kitchen ticked. Outside, the Perugia street was ordinary and still and completely indifferent. The name on the paper was not Lucian Falco. It was not a proxy he'd never heard of. It was not a legal fiction with no face attached to it. It was Renata Sorelli. He drove back to Rome in a silence that Ricci did not attempt to fill. He held the folded paper in his left hand for the first hour and then put it in his jacket pocket and looked at the road. He was doing something he almost never did. He was letting the full architecture of it assemble in front of him without trying to manage any single part of it. Renata Sorelli, beneficial owner of the account that had received 2 years of diverted Marchetti funds. Not Lucian's secret partner, not his financial instrument, his equal, his co-architect. The money hadn't been flowing to Lucian's private reserve. It had been flowing to a structure they both controlled, which meant the arrangement between them was not employer and asset. It was a partnership, which meant the 3 years Renata had spent alongside Damien had not been what he'd understood them to be. The access she'd had to the estate, to his conversations, to the texture of the organization's internal functioning had not been incidental. It had been the purpose. He'd been the cover, not the target, the vehicle. He sat with this. He let it be what it was. The anger came, but it came differently than he expected. Not hot, not the kind that blurs. Cold and total and very, very patient. The kind of anger that knows it has time. When he got back to the Prati apartment, it was mid-afternoon. Serena looked up when he came in. She read his face the way she always did. Quickly, completely. And she was still. He put the paper on the table in front of her without speaking. She picked it up. She read it. She looked at him. She controls the account, she said. She and Lucien built it together. He sat down. He felt the exhaustion now, physical and heavy. The 3 years she was in my house. She wasn't... He stopped. He restarted. She had access to my uncle, to the estate, to me. He looked at the paper in her hands. The single payment you couldn't trace. The one 14 months ago that didn't fit Lucian's pattern. What was the date? Serena put the paper down and pulled the legal pad to her. She found the entry. She read the date. Damien nodded once, slowly. That was 3 days after my uncle told me, privately, in his study, that he was formally naming me his successor. He told no one else that day. He looked at the table. The payment was a transfer. She was being paid for intelligence. She confirmed my uncle's decision to Lucian so he could begin accelerating his timeline. Serena was quiet. She's been inside this organization for 3 years, and she's been theirs for at least that long. He looked up at her. And last night she pulled the Calabria files and gave Lucian our location. He stopped. Something moved in his face. A single, compressed thing. The briefest evidence of something he felt too deeply to carry on the surface. Then it was gone. "Damien," Serena said, quietly. Not softly. She wasn't soft in the conventional sense, but directly. Like she was acknowledging that what he was carrying was real and she wasn't going to pretend otherwise. He looked at her. "We have the name now," she said. "Everything fits, the routing, the amounts, the timeline, the beneficial owner." She held his gaze. "We go to Caruso tonight and we tell him. We get Daddy's written confirmation. We build the full presentation for the commission." She paused. "We have 12 days. He looked at the paper on the table. "She's still in my house," he said. "I know. If she knows we have the name, she may not know yet. She knows the original files were taken and the raid failed. She doesn't know about Dottie." Serena kept her voice level. "But she'll know something shifted when you don't come back and when you don't contact her through the normal channel." He picked up his phone. He turned it over in his hand. "What are you going to do?" she said. He looked at the phone. He thought about Renata at the restaurant table in Trastevere, at every dinner table, in his uncle's study, in the library doorway 2 evenings ago, with the fear she'd worked to disguise as jealousy. He thought about 3 years. He put the phone down. "Nothing," he said. "Not yet. If she moves, it tells us what Lucian knows. If she stays still, it tells us he's still running the original plan." He looked at Serena. "Either way, she's more useful where she is than she is if we move on her now." Serena held his gaze steadily. There was something in her face, not approval, not warmth, but a specific kind of recognition. The look of someone who has understood for the first time that the man across from her is capable of exactly as much as this situation requires. She picked up the legal pad. "Then let's build the case," she said. They worked through the night. At some point, the city outside went fully dark, and then began to lighten again, and neither of them marked it. The documents were spread between them, and the legal pad filled page after page, and the metal case was opened and closed as specific documents were cross-referenced against the new information and the shape of it. The full shape, finally, all the pieces oriented correctly, became visible on the table between them like a structure that had always been there, waiting for enough light. At 3 in the morning, Damien reached for the water glass and found it empty and got up to fill it, and came back and sat down and looked at her. She was writing, precise and focused, the pencil moving in short, deliberate strokes. There was a line of tension along her jaw that had been there for hours. Her hair had come partly loose from where she'd pinned it. She looked exactly like what she was. A person who had been awake for too long doing something extremely difficult because it was necessary. He said nothing. He sat back down and went back to work. Later, he couldn't have said how much later, she stopped writing and looked at the assembled pages and looked at him and said, "It's complete." He looked at the case and the pad and the organized evidence between them. "Everything," he said. "Everything. Routing codes confirmed. Shell account identified. Beneficial owner documented by direct witness testimony with supporting transaction records. Payment timeline establishing the intelligence arrangement." She looked at him directly. "The commission bosses will have no legitimate ground to dispute it. Any one of them with financial sophistication, and Caruso has it, and 2 others definitely have it, will see what this is within 10 minutes of looking at it." He looked at the full assembled case. "Then we go to Caruso in the morning," he said, "and we end this." She nodded. She began putting the documents back into the case with the same methodical care she'd always used, each page in its specific order. The case latched and set precisely in the center of the table where they could both see it. Then she put her pencil down and folded her hands and sat in the silence of 4 in the morning in a borrowed apartment with the work finished and the next thing not yet begun. He was looking at her, not calculating, not assessing, just looking, at the exhaustion on her face and the ink on her fingers and the quiet steadiness of her. This woman who had sat in his house for a month being dismissed and had spent that month building the instrument that would save everything he'd been given. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you," she said. Neither of them moved immediately. Outside the window, somewhere in the Prati streets, a bird started up. A single sharp note, then silence, then the note again, testing the morning before committing to it. Damien looked at the case on the table. He thought about what came next. The meeting with Caruso, the presentation to the commission, the 12 days between now and the moment where everything either held or broke. He thought about Renata in his house and Lucian in his territories, and the 41 men in Calabria and the 2 bought commission votes, and the 11 other men in that room who would have to look at what Serena had built and decide what they believed. He thought about his uncle, who had watched all of this from his dying chair and had structured a will that looked like punishment and had actually been a map. He reached across the table and picked up the metal case. He held it for a moment. Then he set it back down and stood up and said, 4 hours. Then we move. And Serena Valenti, who had never once asked him for anything, looked up at him with those steady, magnified eyes and said, quietly and without ceremony, "Wake me at 8. He went to the sofa. She went to the room. The bird outside continued its single-note announcement into the lightning dark, and the case sat on the table between the lamp's yellow circle and the windows growing gray, and in 12 days something was going to end. The only question still remaining was which something it would be. He woke at 7:50 without an alarm. The sofa had left a crease along his jaw, and his shoulder ached from the angle he'd slept in. And for exactly 2 seconds, the gap between unconscious and aware, he didn't know where he was. Then it came back in full. The apartment, the case on the table, 12 days. He sat up. Serena was already awake. He could hear water running in the other room. He stood up and rolled his neck and went to the window and looked at the Prati rooftops in the 8 o'clock light. And he made himself think through the day in sequence. Caruso first, then the confirmation call to Dati, then the logistics of the commission presentation. Because if he thought about it in sequence, he didn't have to think about Renata and what she was doing inside his house right now, which he couldn't do anything about yet, which meant thinking about it was only wait. The water stopped. Serena came out of the room. She'd slept in her clothes and her hair was down and she was putting it back up as she walked, her fingers moving through it with efficient practice. And she looked at the table first, the case, confirming it was where she'd left it, and then at him. "Caruso," she said. "I'll call him now." He called. Caruso answered on the second ring, which meant he'd been awake and waiting. Damien said 3 words. "We have it." Caruso said 1. "When?" Damien said, "This morning, wherever you say." Caruso gave an address. Not the Trastevere restaurant this time. Something closer, a private residence in Parioli that he said belonged to a retired judge who owed him a favor and was currently in Sardinia. They left at 9. Caruso was alone in the Parioli house when they arrived, which surprised Damien slightly. He'd expected staff, security, the usual architecture of a man in Caruso's position. But the old man opened the door himself and led them to a sitting room with heavy curtains drawn and a coffee service already laid out. And he looked at the metal case in Serena's hands with the expression of a man who recognizes something he's been anticipating for a long time. They spread the documents on the table. Caruso reads slowly, the way men of his generation read important things, with complete attention, with no performance of speed. He went through the routing analysis first, then the ledger comparisons, then the corrected figures from the Calabria records, then the timeline. He asked 3 questions, each precise, each directed at Serena, each answered precisely. When he reached the final page, Dotti's written statement and the Meridian Conseil documentation with Renata Sorelli's name, he stopped. He looked at the name for a long time. Then he put the page down carefully and picked up his coffee cup and looked at nothing in particular. "She was at your uncle's table," he said, "multiple times, over 3 years." He said it to Damien, but it wasn't really directed at him. "Yes," Damien said. "Vittorio knew her." He believed he did. Caruso set the cup down. "Did he know about her and Lucian?" Damien looked at the page on the table. "I think he suspected something. I don't think he knew the full architecture." He paused. "The payment 14 months ago, 3 days after he told me I was the successor, I think that's when he started to understand. And he got sick 4 months later." Caruso looked at the page. His face was careful and very still. "We will not explore that line right now. Some things require more certainty than we currently have." The implication sat in the room like something physical. Damien absorbed it. He didn't allow himself to react to it yet. Later. The commission meeting, Damien said. 10 days. What do we have? Caruso looked at the documents assembled before him. He went through the count the way he would tally a vote, methodically, without sentimentality. The two members Lucian has purchased, Arrighi and DeSantis. Those are gone. The Neapolitan bloc is 3 votes, and they're committed to him. He looked at Damien, but committed to him as a winning option. If the winning option changes, they shift, possibly. The Neapolitan bloc follows power, not loyalty. It's always been true. Caruso leaned back. The 4 undecided members. I've spoken with 2 of them, as I said I would. They're movable. With this evidence, they move. He tapped the documents. That gives you 6 votes, including mine, against Lucian's 5. 7-5 in your favor is enough to table his motion and pass a formal censure. Will they accept Serena's presentation? Damien said. Caruso looked at Serena. He looked at her the way he'd looked at the documents, carefully, completely. You presented the financial analysis at the Genoa dispute 2 years ago, he said. I remember it. You were not introduced by name. No, she said. Your uncle presented it as his own work. I prepared the materials. I thought the analysis was unusually precise. He looked at her for another moment. If you walk into that commission room as Vittorio Marchetti's chosen analyst, the person he specifically trained and positioned and protected for this moment, and you present this evidence, the bosses will understand what they're looking at. Old Vittorio reaching out from beyond his death to clean his own house. He picked up the Dottie statement. With Dottie's testimony attached, it's unassailable. Dottie will confirm publicly, Damien said. He told me this morning. Caruso folded his hands. He's been carrying this for 14 months. Men of his generation, carrying something like this is its own particular weight. Serena had been listening without interjecting. She said now, quietly, there's a timing problem. Both men looked at her. The presentation is in 10 days. Lucian knows the estate was raided and the raid failed. He knows Damien is not in his house and is not moving through the known channels. Whatever Renata has told him since last night, he knows something went wrong. She looked at Damien. He won't wait 10 days if he believes the presentation is a threat. Damien had already been thinking this. He needs the commission meeting. He needs the legitimacy. He needs the legitimacy if the operation goes smoothly. If it doesn't go smoothly, if he believes we're going to walk into that room and destroy him, he may decide a different kind of move is preferable. She looked at Caruso. An accident, a disappearance, something that removes the threat before the meeting rather than competing with it inside the meeting. The room was quiet. She's right, Caruso said. He said it simply, without apparent emotion, the way he said things that were both true and unpleasant. If Lucian decides the commission meeting is compromised, he has enough personnel in position to move directly. He looked at Damien. You and Serena cannot be accessible. We're not at the estate. This location will not hold for 10 days either. He has people looking. Caruso stood up slowly, the movement of a large man in his late 60s who has sat too long. He went to the window and looked at the edge of the curtain without touching it. There is a property in the Abruzzo Mountains. It belongs to no one in the commission or the organization. It's registered to a family trust that was established before any current member was active. Your uncle knew of it. I've never told anyone else. He turned around. You go there. You stay dark. I coordinate the commission logistics from here, communicate only through the judge's line, which is clean. He looked at them both. 10 days. You do not move. You do not contact anyone outside this channel. Damien looked at Serena. She gave a single slight nod. We'll need the commission to be formally convened before we arrive, Damien said. If we walk in while the session is still organizing, Lucian has room to create procedural obstacles. I'll have it convened and seated before you enter the room. Caruso moved to the table and began organizing the documents back into their order. I'll call an emergency session under the Organizational Continuity Clause. It requires only 3 senior members to invoke and cannot be procedurally blocked once called. He looked at Damien. Lucian won't know the grounds for the session until he's already in the room. Damien nodded. One more thing, Caruso said. He picked up the final page, Renata's name, and held it. The woman. She is still in your house. Yes. She cannot be moved against before the commission meeting. If she disappears or something happens to her, Lucian declares open war immediately, and the commission meeting becomes irrelevant. He looked at Damien. She stays exactly where she is. She continues to believe she has not been identified. Damien held the old man's gaze. Understood. Caruso set the page down. And after the commission meeting? After the commission meeting, Damien said, she answers for it. Caruso nodded once. He asked nothing else about it. They left Rome that afternoon. Ricci drove north and then east into the Abruzzo Hills, the city dissolving behind them into the long open landscape of central Italy. Stone villages on hilltops, the occasional flash of a river in a valley, the road climbing and narrowing as they went higher. The mountains ahead were pale blue in the afternoon haze, the kind of landscape that would be beautiful if you had any capacity to see it as landscape, which Damien did not. Serena sat beside him in the rear seat with the metal case on her lap and said nothing for an hour. Then she said, "What do you need to do to prepare?" He looked at her. "What?" "For the commission presentation. You'll be addressing the room before I present the evidence. What do you need to prepare?" He hadn't thought about it in those terms. He'd been thinking about logistics, the approach to the building, the security arrangement, the vote count, not the actual moment of walking into that room. "I'll be ready," he said. "That's not what I asked." She looked at him with the directness she always used, not unkind, just precise. "You've never addressed the full commission as head of the family. Your uncle addressed them for 30 years. Lucien has been cultivating those relationships for a decade." She paused. "You need to be something specific in that room, not just angry, not just right." He looked at the road ahead. "What do I need to be?" "Vittorio's son." She said it carefully. "Not literally. They know the relationship. But you need to be the thing they believed Vittorio was, which is a man who puts the organization's stability above his own advantage. That's why they trusted him." She held his gaze. "Lucien has spent years telling those men, subtly and without ever saying it directly, that you're impulsive and self-interested and not ready. If you walk into that room looking like a man who's furious and wants revenge, you confirm everything he said." He was quiet for a moment. "So what do I look like?" he said. "You look like a man who found out his family was being robbed and brought the proof and is asking the table to handle it correctly." She looked at the mountains ahead. "You're not accusing Lucien, you're presenting the commission with an obligation. That's different." He thought about this for the rest of the drive. The Abruzzo property was a stone farmhouse set on a hillside above a valley, 3 kilometers from the nearest village on a road that required a vehicle with real clearance to navigate. Inside it was basic and clean, heavy furniture, thick walls, a fireplace, a kitchen with functional provisions. Caruso's people had been there before them. There was firewood stacked and water running, and in the main room a table large enough to work at. Ricci would stay with them. One other man arrived the following morning, a quiet individual Caruso sent who made a circuit of the property perimeter twice a day and said almost nothing else. The 10 days in the mountain house had a specific quality that Damien would think about later in terms he didn't have words for at the time. The work continued, Serena refining the presentation, Damien reviewing the commission protocols with a thoroughness he'd never previously applied to them. The two of them at the table for long hours going over the evidence and the anticipated objections and the procedural sequence of the session. It was the kind of work that had no performance in it, no audience, no stakes in the moment, just two people trying to build something precise enough to hold under pressure. But it was also, around the edges of the work, something else. It was the first time Damien had been in a sustained space with another person without the structures he usually used to manage other people: authority, distance, the controlled performance of leadership. There was none of that available here. He was exhausted and uncertain and working at the edge of his actual capacity, and she saw all of it, and she didn't use it. She didn't soften toward him in a way that asked for something back. She didn't perform warmth to ease his discomfort. She was simply there, steady and direct and completely consistent, and the consistency of it was, after a week, something he depended on without having made a decision to depend on it. On the 5th evening, he came inside from standing on the hillside in the cold, and she had made coffee and put 2 cups on the table, and he sat down and picked his up and said, without planning to, "Tell me about your father." She looked up from the pad. She looked at him for a moment. "Why?" she said. "You told me you learned survival training after witnessing his death." He held the cup. "I never asked about it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she set the pencil down. "He was an accountant," she said. "A legitimate one. He worked for a business that had connections he didn't know about, or that he knew about and believed were compartmentalized from his work. She looked at the table. When I was 10, two men came to our apartment. I was in the back bedroom. I heard everything. She paused. He'd found something in the accounts that he wasn't supposed to find. He tried to report it. To the authorities, Damien said. Yes. She looked at him. He trusted the wrong structure to protect him. He held her gaze. He didn't say he was sorry. She wasn't telling it in a way that asked for that. Vittorio found me 11 months later, she said. I don't know how. I've never been entirely certain. He brought me into the household, and he told me that the world I'd been taught to trust had failed my father, and that learning to understand the actual world, the one underneath, was the only real protection. She paused. He was not a kind man in the conventional sense, but he was honest about what things were. That was more useful. He trained you as an analyst. He trained me as whatever was useful. Accounts, yes. Legal structures, communication protocols. She looked at the coffee cup in her hands. And practical things. How to move unobserved. How to treat a wound. How to navigate a building in the dark. For situations like the one we're in. For the possibility of situations like this, yes. She looked at him. He knew he was dying for 2 years before it became visible. He spent that time preparing for everything he could anticipate. Damien thought about his uncle in his study, the careful old man who had watched everything and said little and structured a will that looked on its surface like manipulation and was in fact a set of precise instructions. He could have told me, Damien said, about what he suspected, about what you were doing. He could have. She said it without defensiveness. I think he wasn't certain you'd listen. The truth of that landed without cushioning. He sat with it. I wouldn't have, he said. She looked at him and said nothing, which was, he understood, a form of agreement. On the 7th day, Caruso called through the clean channel with the confirmed vote count, 6-5 in their favor, with one undecided member who would be present but had not committed. Lucien had not moved. Renata was still at the estate. The commission session was formally convened for 3 days hence. Caruso had invoked the continuity clause. The other 2 senior members had countersigned, and the session was now legally binding regardless of any procedural challenge. On the 8th day, Damien stood in the main room of the mountain house and delivered the address he would give to the commission. And Serena sat across from him and listened without expression, and when he finished, she said, again, slower in the middle, the evidence section is where they'll be processing, not just listening. Give them the space. He did it again. She said, better. The ending is right. On the 9th night, he couldn't sleep, and he sat by the fireplace, and she came out of the room at some point and sat in the chair across from him, and they were quiet together for an hour. The fire going down to coals, the mountain outside the window dark and enormous. He said at some point, after this is over. She waited. The organization, he said, the way it's been run, the way my uncle ran it, and the way I would have run it if none of this happened. He looked at the coals. I don't want to do it that way. She looked at him. What way? The fear. The constant management of people through fear and obligation. He was quiet for a moment. It creates exactly what we're dealing with. It creates Lucien. It creates Renata. It creates people who calculate constantly because the environment rewards calculation over anything else. She was watching him. He could feel her watching him. What do you want instead? She said. He looked at the fire. I don't know yet. Something that lasts longer than the next threat. He paused. Something that isn't just waiting to fall apart. She was quiet for a long moment. That's a harder thing to build than what you inherited, she said. I know. But it's possible. She looked at the coals. Your uncle understood this, I think, in his last years. He'd gotten to the age where he could see what the structure he'd built was producing. He was tired of it. Is that why he changed the will? Partly. She paused. And partly because he'd watched me for 12 years and he believed in what I could do, and he wanted to see if he could give both of us something neither of us could do alone. The fire went quiet. He looked at her across the low glow of the coals. 12 years. She'd been 12 years old when she came into his uncle's house, and she had spent every year of that time building herself into the specific instrument that was now, in these specific circumstances, the most important thing the family had. He thought about the wedding. He thought about the ring on the table. He thought about the two words, nothing more, and what they'd cost, and what they'd meant about him. "I owe you an apology," he said. She looked at him. "The wedding. What I said." He met her eyes. "What I did." She held his gaze for a long moment. She didn't say it was all right. She didn't diminish it. She said, "I knew what I was walking into. It didn't hurt less because I knew, but I understood the situation." "Understanding the situation doesn't make it something I should have done," he said. She looked at him in the coal light and said, "No, it doesn't." He held her gaze. "I'm sorry," he said. She looked at him for another moment. Then something in her face, not softening exactly, something more precise than that, shifted slightly. "Okay," she said. They sat by the dying fire until the coals went gray, and neither of them said anything else, and it was not uncomfortable. Day 10. They came down from the mountain in the early morning, the car moving through the pale, cold landscape of the Abruzzo valleys, while the sun came up somewhere behind the cloud cover and made the world a flat, gray, even light that had no particular warmth in it. Serena had the case. Damien sat with his hands folded and his eyes on the road and his mind on the sequence: arrival, session, address, presentation, vote. He'd run it 200 times in his head. He ran it again. Ricci drove without speaking. He'd been with Farini for 12 years, and he understood, without needing to be told, the particular character of a vehicle carrying people towards something that would end in one of two very different ways. They reached the outskirts of Rome at 9:30. Caruso's message came through on the clean channel at 9:43. Session opened. Full commission seated. Lucien present. Dati in the building. You have 30 minutes before the procedural window closes. Come now. Damien looked at Serena. She was already looking at him. "Ready," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," he said. Ricci got them there in 22 minutes, cutting through the morning city with the particular aggression of a man who has been told what this drive is worth. The commission convened in a warehouse complex in the Ostiense district that had been used for this purpose for 15 years. Officially a commercial logistics hub. Actually a space that 12 men in the Italian underworld considered as close to neutral ground as existed. 3 armed checkpoints. A main floor that had been cleared to accommodate a long table and 14 chairs. Overhead lights that were too bright and made everyone look a little more exhausted than they were. Damien walked in through the secondary entrance with Serena 2 steps behind him and Ricci at the rear, and he felt the room before he could see the table. The specific atmospheric pressure of 14 people and a decision that couldn't be undone. He walked to the head of the table. Lucien was seated 4 chairs down on the left side. He was, as always, composed. Dark suit, the slight smile of a man who has learned to wear confidence as a garment regardless of what's underneath it. He looked at Damien when he entered, and the smile shifted a fraction, and what Damien saw underneath it for just a moment, just one, was the specific calculation of a man who is deciding whether the situation is still manageable. He was deciding. Damien met his eyes and held them, and let his face be completely still, and he watched Lucien finish the calculation and arrive at his answer. And the answer was, yes, still manageable, because Lucien did not know what was in the case, and did not know about Dati, and did not know that Caruso had been working for 10 days, and did not know how complete the thing Serena had built actually was. That would last another 12 minutes. Caruso, at the far end of the table, said, "The session is formally open. Under Continuity Clause 14, the chair recognizes Damien Vescari, head of the Marchetti family, for a formal address on matters of organizational integrity." A murmur. The 12 men around this table settling. Lucien's smile held. Damien straightened. He began. He spoke for 9 minutes. He said what he'd prepared, and he said it the way Serena had shaped him to say it. Measured, not angry, the voice of a man presenting an obligation rather than prosecuting a grievance. He laid the timeline without embellishment. His uncle's declining health, the financial records Vittorio had maintained separately from the organization's main accounts, the discrepancies identified during the administrative transition. He said his uncle had begun this work before his death. He said the work was now complete. He said the commission was the appropriate body to hear it. He did not say Lucien's name once. He sat down. Lucien's smile had changed, not collapsed. He was too controlled for collapse. But the calculation behind his eyes was running differently now, running faster. Serena opened the metal case. She stood up. She was wearing the same clothes she'd worn for 3 days in the mountain house. Her hair was up. Her glasses were straight. She looked, in the brutal overhead light of the Ostiense warehouse, exactly like what she was. A woman who has done a very specific thing extremely well and is about to show it to the people who need to see it. She began to speak. Her voice didn't shake. It was even and precise, and she looked at the men around the table rather than at her documents, because she'd memorized the documents, and she held their attention with the particular authority of someone who has nothing to perform and is simply telling the truth. She walked them through it in sequence. The routing codes, the ledger discrepancies, the Calabria record alterations. She passed physical copies of the affected pages, with the original numbers visible under the correction fluid around the table. The escalating diversion amounts, the Meridian Conseil structure. She laid the Luxembourg shell documentation flat on the table and named the beneficial owner clearly once and did not repeat it. She put Datti's written statement in front of Caruso. She said, Enzo Datti, who has served the Umbrian territory for 21 years and who was used as an unknowing routing point in this structure for 14 months, will confirm the statement verbally at this session if the Commission requests. She sat down. The room was completely silent. Lucien's composure had held through the routing evidence and through the ledger alterations and through the shell documentation. When she said the name Renata Sorelli, something shifted in his face. So briefly it was almost invisible. And then he locked it down. He looked at the Datti statement. He looked at the pages being passed around the table. Arrighi, one of the 2 commission members he'd purchased, had his eyes on the table in front of him. DeSantis was reading the Calabria documents with the focused expression of a man who is deciding, in real time, how exposed he is. The Neapolitan bloc's 3 members were looking at each other in the brief, rapid way of people reassessing a calculation. Lucien said, into the silence, with a control that was extraordinary under the circumstances, "These documents require independent verification. A handwritten statement and internal family ledgers are not—" "The Luxembourg registration is public record," Serena said. She said it without looking at him. "It can be verified by any member of this commission through their own legal representatives. The Meridian Conseil registration shows the beneficial ownership clearly." She looked at the table. "The account itself can be frozen pending investigation through the Commission's own financial mechanisms. I'd suggest doing that immediately, before this session concludes." The murmur around the table was different now, not uncertain. The specific sound of 12 men who are past the point of uncertainty and are now doing something more final. Lucien looked at Damien across the table. Damien looked back. And in the particular silence between them, the silence of all of it said and all of it heard, and nothing left to manage except what came next. Lucien made a decision. He reached into his jacket. Caruso was already on his feet. 3 other men around the table moved back. Lucien had the gun out, and he was not pointing it at Damien. He was pointing it at Serena. "The account does not get frozen," he said. His voice was still level. "Extraordinary. Nothing in this room leaves this room until I say it does. We are going to sit back down, and we are going to have a different conversation about how the Marchetti succession is actually—" Damien was already moving, not toward Lucien, toward Serena. He covered the distance between their chairs in less than 2 seconds, his body moving with the pure animal urgency of something that bypassed thought entirely. He put himself between her and the gun, and his hand found the edge of the table, and he was looking directly at Lucien across 3 meters of air and a drawn weapon and the total silence of 12 men who had stopped breathing. His heart was hitting his ribs so hard he could feel it in his back teeth. His face was completely still. "Put it down," he said. Lucien looked at him over the barrel. His hand was steady. His eyes were not. The calculation in them had given way to something rawer and more desperate. The look of a man who has watched his structure dissolve in real time and is now making decisions with what's left. "Step aside," Lucien said. "No," Damien said. The word was very quiet. A muscle in Lucien's jaw moved. "She is not worth—" "Put the gun down," Damien said. And his voice this time had the particular quality of total resolution. Not anger, not threat, not performance. Just a man at the end of all available uncertainty, standing exactly where he intended to stand, saying the last thing he intended to say before whatever happened next happened. Lucian's eyes moved between Damien and the room and back to Damien, and he understood, in the way that intelligent people understand things they don't want to understand, that the calculation had completed and the answer was not the one he needed. Every man in that room was watching. Every man in that room had seen Damien Vescari step between a gun and his wife. Every man in that room was going to remember it. Lucian's hand didn't lower. His finger moved on the trigger. And Damien, who had spent his whole life being arrogant and reckless and wrong about the things that mattered most, stood completely still in front of the woman who had saved everything he had and did not move an inch. The gun went off. Not at Serena, not at Damien. The shot went into the ceiling, a single flat crack that filled the warehouse with a sound that bounced off every hard surface and left a ringing silence behind it. Because in the half-second before Lucian's finger completed its pull, Caruso moved. For a man of his size and age, he moved with a speed that surprised everyone in the room, including probably himself. He came around the corner of the table and got both hands on Lucian's gun arm and drove it upward, and the shot went into the rafters, and then 3 other men were on their feet, and Lucien was against the wall with his arm pinned and the gun on the floor, and the ringing was still going in everyone's ears. Damien hadn't moved. I was still standing in the same position, between Serena and where the gun had been, and his heart was still hitting his ribs with that same hard rhythm, and his hands were steady at his sides, and he was looking at Lucien against the wall with the expression of a man who has just come to the end of a very long road and found exactly what he expected to find there. Lucien's composure was gone. Not replaced by panic, replaced by something older and more honest. The face underneath the face. A man stripped of every layer of careful construction. He was breathing hard, his jacket pulled sideways from Caruso's grip, and he was looking at Damien with eyes that had stopped calculating, because there was nothing left to calculate. Caruso stepped back. He straightened his own jacket. He picked up the gun from the floor and handed it to the man nearest him and turned to the table. "The session will take a 10-minute recess," he said. His voice was completely even, like nothing had happened, like a gun had not just fired in a room containing 12 of the most dangerous men in Italy. "When we reconvene, we will vote." He walked back to his chair and sat down. The 10 minutes were not quiet. Damien stepped back to where Serena was, and she was standing behind her chair with both hands on the back of it. Not gripping, just resting, the way you rest your hands on something solid when your legs want to be less reliable than you need them to be. She was looking at him. "Are you all right?" he said. His voice came out lower than he intended. "Yes." She looked at him steadily. "You?" "Yes." They stood like that for a moment, 2 feet apart, the table between them, the room full of men doing the various things men do after a gun fires in an enclosed space, some standing in tight groups talking rapidly in low voices, some very still, some moving toward the exits to stand in cooler air. Arrighi had not moved from his chair. He was sitting with his hands flat on the table looking at nothing, and his face had the particular quality of a man who has watched the horse he bet everything on break its leg coming out of the gate. Lucien was still against the far wall. 2 of Caruso's men flanked him, not holding him, just present. The specific presence that communicates that movement would be a mistake. He had himself back under some version of control. His face was reassembled into something that was not quite its former composure, but was doing its best. He was looking at Serena. She met his gaze. She held it for a moment with no particular expression. Not triumph, not contempt, not the satisfaction of someone who has won. Just the direct look of a woman who has finished a thing she set out to do. Then she looked away, back to the documents on the table in front of her, and began organizing them into their closing order. That look, that looking away, was the most devastating thing she could have done to him, and Damien understood it, and he didn't think she'd done it deliberately. She'd simply moved on to the next task. The vote took 4 minutes. When the commission reconvened, Caruso called it without ceremony. 7 in favor of accepting the evidence and initiating formal censure proceedings against Lucian Falco. 4 opposed, Arrighi de Santis and 2 members of the Neapolitan bloc. 1 abstention, the undecided member who had not committed and who had apparently decided that abstaining was his best available navigation through a situation that had just changed character completely. 7-4 with one abstention, more than enough. The motion passed. Lucien's accounts, including Meridian Conseil, were ordered frozen pending commission review. His organizational authority over the 6 territories was suspended immediately and transferred to interim management pending investigation. Dadi was formally cleared of wrongdoing on the basis that his participation had been unknowing, which Caruso moved for specifically and which passed without opposition. 2 members of the Neapolitan bloc voted against on procedural grounds that everyone in the room understood to mean we are not entirely certain which way the wind will blow once this settles, and we are protecting our options. Damien noted both names. He would remember them. When the formal vote results were announced, the room had the specific quiet of a decision that cannot be appealed. The 12 men around the table were already processing what this meant for their own positions, their own calculations, the new architecture of the organization going forward. Some of them would be relieved, some would be making new plans. All of them would, in the weeks ahead, find ways to communicate to Damien Vescari that they had always believed in him, which would be mostly untrue and entirely expected. Caruso announced the session closed. Lucien stood. He was escorted, not roughly, but firmly, the escort that is not optional, toward the secondary exit. He walked without resistance. At the door he stopped and turned and looked across the room one final time. He looked at Damien. Damien looked back. Whatever passed between them in that look, and something did pass, the specific compressed communication of 2 men at the end of something that cannot be undone. It was not something either of them would have been able to name. It was not quite hatred. It was not quite grief. It was the look of 2 people who grew up in the same world and made different choices and arrived at their different ends because of those choices, and who both understood in this final moment exactly how it had gone and why. Lucien looked away first. He walked out the door. In the car afterward, driving through the Ostend streets back toward the city proper, Damien sat in the rear seat and said nothing for a long time. Serena was beside him. The case was on her lap. Outside the city was doing what cities do, moving, indifferent, ongoing. At some point he said, "Renata." One word. Serena knew what it contained. "Yes," she said, "I have to handle it today." He said it looking at the window. "It doesn't wait." "No," she said. "It doesn't." He called Farini from the car. He said 4 words. "Bring her to the estate." Farini said, "She's already here. She hasn't left in 2 days." There was something in Farini's voice that was not quite anything Damien could name, the voice of a man who has been watching something and has opinions about it that he has kept entirely to himself. "I'll be there in an hour," Damien said. He ended the call. Serena did not ask what he was going to do. She understood what he was going to do. She didn't perform sympathy about it either. She sat with her hands on the case and looked at the city going past and let him sit with what he was carrying. He appreciated this. He would not have been able to say so. The estate looked the same. It always looked the same, he thought, pulling through the main gate, the gravel drive, the stone facade, the windows that gave nothing away. Places didn't register what happened inside them. That was a human problem. Farini met him at the door. He looked tired, and he looked like a man who had been running a siege for 2 weeks, which was approximately what he'd been doing. "She knows something went wrong," Farini said quietly. "She's been asking about you, trying to use the communication channels that aren't working anymore." He paused. "She hasn't tried to leave." "No," Damien said. "She wouldn't. Leaving would confirm it." He went inside. Renata was in the main sitting room. She was dressed carefully. She was always dressed carefully. It was one of the things that had always been true about her, the deliberateness of her presentation. She was standing by the window, and she turned when he came in, and her face arranged itself into the particular expression she used for difficult conversations. Composed, slightly wounded, the look of a woman wrongly accused who is choosing dignity over protest. He'd seen it many times. He understood it differently now. He closed the door behind him. He stood in the center of the room. He didn't sit. She looked at him for a moment and then said carefully, "I've been worried. You were gone, and I couldn't—" "Meridian Conseil," he said. The composure didn't break, but something underneath it shifted, something deep and structural, the particular movement of a foundation under stress. Her eyes went very still. I don't know what that is, she said. He looked at her. He'd spent the drive from the city deciding how he was going to do this, whether he would give her the evidence piece by piece, or lay it all at once, or ask questions and watch her construct the lies. He decided against all of it. There was no version of this that produced anything he wanted to see. He already knew what had happened. He already knew what she'd done. What remained was not information gathering. What remained was an ending. The commission voted 2 hours ago, he said. Lucien's authority is suspended. His accounts are frozen. Meridian Conseil, the account registered in your name that you and Lucien built together over the last 3 years, is frozen with them. He held her gaze. It's done, Renata. She stood very still. The composure was still there. He could see her maintaining it the way you hold a position in physical pain, deliberately, with effort, with the constant micro-corrections of someone who knows what happens when they let go. Whatever you think you know, she began. Dottie confirmed the routing. Caruso has the Luxembourg registration. Your name is on the beneficial ownership declaration. He said it quietly. There's nothing to explain. The composure held for another 3 seconds. Then it went. Not dramatically. She wasn't a dramatic person. That had never been true about her. It went the way things go when they've been held too long. All at once, quietly, the particular collapse of someone who is too exhausted to maintain the structure any longer. She sat down in the chair behind her. She put one hand on the armrest and she looked at the floor and she said nothing for a long moment. When she looked up, her face was different, stripped. The face she actually had underneath everything she usually put on top of it. She was 32 years old and she looked it, and she was tired in a way that cosmetics and composure couldn't address. How long have you known? She said. Her voice was flat, the performing quality gone out of it. I found your name 9 days ago. He looked at her. I've been asking myself since then how long it's been going on. She looked at the floor again. 3.5 years, she said. He'd thought it was 3. The extra 6 months sat in him like something physical. The night we met, he said. It wasn't quite a question. Yes. She didn't dress it up. Lucien approached me 8 months before that. He'd been watching who you spent time with. He needed someone who could get close enough to give him current intelligence on the family's internal state. She paused. He chose well. I was motivated. By the money. She looked at him. By the money, and by the fact that I grew up with nothing and I had watched people in your world move it around like it meant nothing, and I was tired of being on the outside of that. She said it without apology. You want me to tell you it was purely mercenary and not personal. It was purely mercenary. You were not a difficult man to spend time with, which made the work easier, but it was always work. He absorbed this. It was honest in a way that almost nothing else in this conversation was likely to be, and he recognized it as such. The Calabria files, he said. Last month. Yes. And my uncle. He looked at her. He had to ask it, even though Caruso had told him not to. What happened with my uncle? She met his eyes. Something moved in her face, something that was not quite guilt and not quite grief and not quite the absence of both. He got sick, she said. I was already sick when I told Lucien he'd confirmed your succession. I told Lucien the timeline. I did not... She stopped. She started again. I did not do anything to accelerate what happened to him. I want you to understand that. He looked at her for a long time. He believed her. Not because he trusted her. He didn't trust her at all, would never trust her again. The word trust had been removed from the room entirely. He believed her because the specific thing she was denying was exactly the thing someone with her particular calculation would have avoided. It was too large a risk, too irreversible, too easily traced. She was not someone who took unnecessary risks. You'll leave Italy, he said. She looked at him. The commission voted to freeze the accounts. Meridian Conseil has no accessible funds. Lucien has no authority and no protection. He held her gaze. If you stay, the consequences of what you've done will find a form that I cannot and will not control. The men in this organization who were loyal to my uncle, who watched you at his table for 3 years, they will understand what you did. I cannot be everywhere. She understood him perfectly. If I leave, she said carefully, I have no interest in spending resources hunting you. You have whatever you kept outside the Conseil account. He paused. Leave. Don't come back. She looked at him for a long moment. The stripped face. The real one. That's more than I deserve, she said. She said it without performance. A flat statement of accounting. Yes, he said. It is. She stood up. She didn't offer anything else, no explanation, no further justification, no parting attempt at the connection that had never actually existed. She picked up her bag from the chair beside her. She walked to the door. She opened it. She stopped with her back to him. For what it's worth, she said. And she stopped again. He waited. She's better than I am, she said. At all of it. She said it without bitterness, with the honesty of a woman who has run out of the energy required for anything else. You should know that. She walked out. He stood in the empty sitting room and listened to her footsteps on the stone floor of the hallway. Go quiet. And then the sound of the front door. And then nothing. He stood there for a moment longer. Then he went to find Serena. She was in the library. Of course she was. She was not working, the ledgers were closed, the legal pad set aside, the table clear. She was sitting with her hands folded and she was looking at the bookshelves that lined the far wall, and when he came in, she turned and looked at him. He sat down across from her. It's done, he said. She nodded. He looked at the table between them, the cleared surface, the absence of the documents that had defined the last 2 months. The room felt different without them, quieter, larger. I let her leave, he said. She looked at him. I know you would. It's the right call strategically, and also, he stopped. He restarted more honestly. I didn't want to watch what happened otherwise. That's also true. That's allowed to be true, she said. He looked at her. She said something before she left. Serena waited. She said you were better than her. At all of it. He held her gaze. She wasn't wrong. Something moved in Serena's face, the micro-expression of someone receiving something they weren't expecting and haven't quite processed yet. Then it settled. She was very good at what she did, Serena said carefully. For 3.5 years in your house, with your uncle, with the captains, that takes real discipline. She paused. I just wanted something different from it. What did you want from it? He said. She looked at him. It was a question he'd never asked her directly. About herself. About her own wants, not about the work, or the evidence, or the organization. She seemed to register this. To finish what your uncle started, she said. To not have spent 12 years learning something and then never used it for anything. She looked at her hands on the table, and she stopped. And, he said, she looked up at him. To prove to myself that the world my father trusted, the one that failed him, wasn't the only world. That a different structure was possible. She said it quietly. Without drama. I know that sounds... It doesn't sound like anything except what it is, he said. She held his gaze. He thought about everything his uncle had built, the fear-based architecture of it, the constant management of loyalty through threat, the way it had produced Lucien and Renata as naturally as it produced anything else. He thought about what he'd said by the dying fire in the Abruzzo house, about wanting something that lasted longer than the next threat. The 6 territories, he said. The ones under Lucien's oversight. Interim management goes to the captains who are already there. I'm not installing anyone new. Stability first. He looked at the cleared table. The financial structure needs a complete audit. Independent, not internal. I want it clean. She was watching him with the focused attention she brought to everything important. The commission members who voted against, Arrighi and DeSantis, he looked at her. They're compromised by what they accepted from Lucien. I'm not moving against them directly. I'm going to give them the opportunity to demonstrate their loyalty over the next 6 months through their territory management. If they take it, we move forward. If they don't, then you have documentation of the current commission session to bring back, she said. Yes. He paused. The Neapolitan bloc will adjust. They already started adjusting in the room. I watched the calculation happen in real time. She nodded slowly. What about the legitimate business structure, the legal fronts? I want them to become the actual businesses, not the fronts. He looked at her steadily. This is going to take years. I know that. But I'm 30 years old, and I have what Vittorio built, and I have... He stopped. She waited. I have you, he said, if you choose to stay. The word choose sat in the air between them. It was deliberate. She heard it. She looked at him for a long moment, long enough that he thought she was going to give him one of her careful, precise, non-committal answers, the kind that kept appropriate distance, that maintained the professional clarity they'd been operating in. She said, "I'm already here." He held her gaze. "That's not the same as choosing." She looked at him, and then, for the first time in 2 months, the first time in their entire acquaintance, possibly the first time in years, he thought, something in her face let go. Not collapsed, not exposed, just released. The specific, careful armor she wore, the armor that had been so necessary for so long, setting itself slightly down. "I choose to stay," she said, quietly and completely. He looked at her across the cleared table in the library where she had spent 2 months dismantling an empire's worth of lies, and he said, "Okay." It was the same word she'd used when he apologized by the fire. They both recognized it. Something in the recognition was almost humor, almost warmth, and it was more real than anything romantic he'd ever produced in his life. The weeks that followed were not easy. They were not supposed to be. Damien called a full assembly of all captains and territory managers 10 days after the commission vote. He stood at the head of the table, the same room where he'd first stood as the new head of the Marchetti family 2 months ago. And he was different in ways that were visible without being nameable. The men in the room felt it before they could articulate it. He was not softer, he was more certain. There is a difference. He spoke for 40 minutes. He laid out the new structure, the financial audit, the territory stabilization plan, the move toward legitimate enterprise over the next 3 years. He said the organization had nearly collapsed from the inside because it had been built in a way that rewarded exactly the kind of behavior that had almost destroyed it. He said that was going to change. 3 captains pushed back. 2 of them were managing territories adjacent to Lucian's former operations and had, Damien suspected, been aware of more than they'd admitted. He addressed their concerns directly and without concession and told them the structure was not negotiable, and he watched them calculate and accept, and he noted who accepted quickly and who accepted slowly. One captain, a man named Vitali from the Northern Territories, who'd been with the organization since before Damien was born, said, toward the end of the meeting, without particular ceremony, "Your uncle would have approved of this, for what that's worth." Damien looked at him. "It's worth something," he said. After the assembly, Farini found him in the hallway and walked beside him in silence for a moment, and then said, "You handled that well." "Serena helped me prepare for it," Damien said. Farini nodded, unsurprised. "She's going to be in that library for the rest of her life, isn't she?" Damien looked at him. "No," he said. "She's going to be wherever she's needed." Farini processed this. "The commission. They'll expect her to stay in the background, the wives of the heads." "The commission can expect whatever they like," Damien said, "and then they can adjust." Farini looked at him with the expression of a man who has known someone since they were young and is now seeing, for the first time, who they actually turned out to be. "Fair enough," he said. Lucien was tried before a commission tribunal 6 weeks after the session. He did not deny what was in front of him. There was nothing to deny, and he was too intelligent to waste energy on it. He sat with his hands folded and listened to the charges and accepted the ruling, which removed him permanently from any position within the organization's structure and prohibited any contact with commission members or family heads. He was escorted out of the tribunal room and out of the building and into a car that took him somewhere unremarkable. Damien was not at the tribunal. He'd sent Caruso as his representative, which was its own message. You don't attend the ending of something that no longer requires your attention. He was at the estate. He was in the library, as it happened, reviewing the first completed section of the financial audit with Serena, who had been working with the independent auditors for 3 weeks, and who had the particular focused energy of someone engaged in work they're genuinely good at. She showed him the first clean balance sheet the organization had produced in at least 5 years. He looked at it for a long time. "This is what it actually is," he said. "Yes." She looked at it with him. "Without the diversion structure and without the inflated territory reports. It's less than what you were told you were inheriting. It's more honest." "Significantly." She paused. "The legal fronts are generating more actual revenue than I think anyone realized. The hospitality group in particular, the reported numbers were being used as a cover for moving larger sums, so no one ever looked at what the businesses were actually producing." She pointed at a line. That hotel chain in northern Italy is genuinely profitable. With proper management, it could triple in 4 years. He looked at the number. Then that's where we start, he said. She picked up her pencil and made a note. He watched her do it. He was sitting across the table from her in the library, at the estate that had been his uncle's life's work and was now his life's problem and his life's possibility, and the light through the windows was afternoon light, the kind that makes old books look warm and dust look like something intentional. And she was making a note in that small, precise handwriting that he could now read without difficulty because he'd been reading it for 2 months. "The glasses," he said. She looked up. "Do you need them?" "Actually." She looked at him with the expression of someone who has been asked something very small that is also not small at all. "No," she said. "I have slight astigmatism, nothing that requires correction." "You wore them as part of the general practice of being overlooked, yes." She said it simply, without defensiveness. "It was useful to be underestimated. The sweaters helped. The way I wore my hair." He thought about 2 months of it. The oversized sweaters, the hair pinned back without care, the glasses that made her eyes look larger and somehow vaguer, the whole architecture of deliberate invisibility, maintained in a house full of men who would have used her differently if they'd seen her clearly. "You don't need to do that anymore," he said. She looked at him. The afternoon light was on her face, and without the glasses he'd known this. He'd seen it gradually. He'd been not acknowledging it for weeks. Not plain. She had never been plain. She had been dressed to disappear, which is a different thing entirely. "I know," she said. She reached up and took the glasses off and set them on the table. She looked at him without them. He looked at her. "Better," he said. She looked at the balance sheet in front of her. He watched the corner of her mouth move in the direction of something that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to it. She picked up her pencil and went back to work. He picked up the page he'd been reviewing and went back to his. 2 months later, Caruso hosted a dinner for the commission heads and their senior representatives. It was the first full gathering since the emergency session. A formal thing, the kind of event that communicates normalcy, that tells 12 men in the organizations they represent that the disruption has been resolved and the structure has stabilized. Damien arrived with Serena. She was wearing a dress the color of deep water, her hair down, no glasses, the specific straightness of bearing of a woman who has decided to stop making herself smaller. She was not transformed in the dramatic sense. She was not performing anything. She was simply, for the first time in that setting, entirely herself. The room noticed, not all at once, not loudly, but the specific quality of attention in a room changes when something expected turns out to be different from the expectation. And this room, which had known Serena Valenti as the quiet, plain wife brought in as a condition of succession, was now seeing something it had not fully registered before. Caruso met them at the entrance. He looked at Serena with the expression of a man who has seen a great many things in his life and recognizes this as among the better ones. He offered her his arm to escort her into the room. She took it. Damien walked beside her on the other side, and the three of them moved into the room together, and the dinner began. At dinner, Damien did not position her at a distance. She sat beside him, not because he arranged it that way for symbolic purposes, but because she was the person he wanted to talk to, and she was his wife, and she was the smartest person in the room by a margin he was now entirely comfortable acknowledging. He said this, in fact, to Vitali, who was seated nearby and who laughed, a short, genuine laugh of surprise, and said, "You're not wrong." Halfway through dinner, one of the commission members, a younger head from the Venetian territories, a man Damien had identified as someone worth cultivating, leaned across the table and addressed Serena directly. He had a question about the Northern Italian Hospitality Group's restructuring, which he'd heard about and which touched on territory adjacent to some of his own interests. She answered him for 6 minutes, clearly, specifically, with 3 concrete data points and 2 strategic recommendations. He listened with the focused attention of a man who has just received excellent information from an unexpected source. When she finished, he looked at Damien and then back at her and said, "You should have been in these rooms a long time ago." She looked at him. "I was," she said. "You just didn't see me." The Venetian boss blinked. Then he laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of him. "Fair," he said. Damien, beside her, said nothing. He picked up his glass. He looked at the room, the 12 men and their various representatives, the architecture of power that he had nearly lost, and had instead rebuilt on different foundations, the world he had inherited by condition and was now shaping by choice. He thought about his uncle, briefly, and without the complicated weight the thought usually carried. The old man had seen something possible and had built a structure around protecting the possibility until the right moment. He had been, in the end, more of a strategist than a father, and that had costs, and the costs were real, and the thing he'd built was also real. You could hold both of those things. He set his glass down. Serena, beside him, was already in another conversation, this one with Caruso, about the audit findings, about what 3 years of honest accounting might produce. Her hands moved slightly as she talked, one of the gestures she made when she was engaged with something, and she had ink on her right forefinger again because she'd been working this morning before they left and hadn't fully noticed, and she was, in every particular, exactly herself. He watched her for a moment. He let himself do it without the internal qualification he'd maintained for months, without the "this is strategic" or "this is practical" or "this is professional" that he'd been using to manage what was actually simply true. She turned, at some point in the conversation, and caught him watching. She held his gaze for a second. There was something in her eyes that was too precise to be called warmth, and too warm to be called anything else. She turned back to Caruso. He turned back to the room. They drove home that night through Rome, the late city going past the windows in the colors it always had at this hour, amber and shadow, and the particular blue of streets after midnight. Ricci drove. The privacy partition was up. They were quiet for most of the drive. Not the silence of distance. The silence of two people who have been in a room for 4 hours performing the various necessary public functions and are now, in the private space of the car, simply not performing anything. At some point she said, "Vitali asked me if I would be willing to consult on the Umbrian territory restructuring after Dati steps back." He looked at her. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd think about it." She paused. "I wanted to ask you first." He held her gaze. The asking, the consulting him, the treating it as a shared decision, was something different from the past. Not submission, the specific quality of a partnership where both people's choices matter to both people. "Do it," he said. She nodded. He looked at the city going past. "I've been thinking about the foundation structure, the legal layer above the hospitality group." He looked at her. "I want a separate entity, genuinely separate, genuinely charitable. Education funding, probably. Rural development." He paused. Something Vittorio would have said was impractical. She looked at him, the edge of a smile. He would have said it was impractical, she agreed. He also would have understood exactly why you're doing it. What's the why? She looked at the passing city. "Because you're trying to build something you can look at in 20 years without hating yourself," she said. "And because the people who benefit from it won't know your name, and that means you can't use it for leverage, which means it's the only completely clean thing the organization will produce." He looked at her. "That's the why," she said. He said, "You know, for someone who spent 12 years learning to be invisible, you see things very clearly." She turned to look at him. The streetlight moved across her face in intervals as they passed lamp after lamp. "I had a lot of time to look," she said. "Nobody was watching me." He held her gaze. "I'm watching now," he said. She held his gaze in return, steady and direct, the way she did everything. "I know," she said. The car moved through the last of the city and out toward the estate, and the lights thinned and the dark of the countryside opened up around them, and Rome receded behind them into its glow on the horizon. She was still looking at him. He reached across the seat and put his hand over hers where it rested on the case. The metal case. Still with them, the thing that had held the evidence, that had held everything together. And he didn't say anything. She turned her hand over under his. They rode the rest of the way home in silence. The estate, when they arrived, was lit the way it always was. Warmly, the windows burning in the dark, the gravel under the wheels, the door opening before they reached it because someone on the staff had heard the car on the drive. They went inside. The door closed behind them. And the house, which had been Vittorio Marchetti's house, and before that his father's house, and which had seen the full inventory of what men do to each other in the name of power and fear, was quiet and warm, and held two people who had come through something genuinely hard together, and was, for the first time in a long time, a place where something other than survival was possible. The library light was off. They left it off.